Oh, by the way, thanks for having me back, because you did so splendidly without me during Poltergeist. I thought they don't need me. Bloody third wheel.
Oh no, not at all. We had great fun with Poltergeist.
I appreciate it immensely.
those were great chats. I mean, I listened back to them a few days ago, and they came out really well. I mean, I think it's just because we liked. I mean, I think it's just passion more than anything. I mean, it was the extreme pleasure we took in the first three films, and then the absolute extreme hatred that we had for that.
I mean, it was fun to listen to, because I mean, the problem I found was, although the original film is, I know so well, it's properly baked in, I hadn't seen any of the others. Some I had never seen, and the first sequel I hadn't seen for decades, and I was running out of time, and I thought, well, I don't want to delay them or postpone this any further, and I don't know how much I'm going to be able to bring to the table anyway with the time available. But actually, I thought it was great actually to be on the outside, sort of listening in for once, and it was like, oh, that's cool. It sounds rather good without me sort of chirping in their ear, really,
I mean, it was really good fun. It was lovely reconnecting with those films. I've got to say, it was the first three in particular was so positive.
It made me think I must get the first and second sequel and find the time to reconnect with them, because I say that the original I know so well. I mean,
they are worth it. They are so worth it. I mean, they are much maligned. They get a lot of stick, the sequels, particularly the third one.
My film collection is filled with things that got lots of stick, and I still doggedly stand by them, so that doesn't bother me.
Oh, excellent.
I watched the other day, I watched Constantine from 2006.
Oh,
the comic book adaptation.
Wow.
Yeah. I'd rather like that film.
I really like that movie.
Yeah,
I think it's really good.
It's all right.
It got so much stick at the time.
Yeah.
I think it's actually a really good film.
It was actually almost buried. I mean, critically, the reception was absolutely atrocious, but it's a lot of fun. I mean, there's some great performances in it. I love everybody now remembers. It seems to have had a bit of a resurgence recently, because people really love that final sequence where you have Gabriel, Satan, and Constantine, which is beautifully put together.
Yeah.
Yeah, Peter Stormare is fantastic.
Whoa. He's only in it for what's 3 minutes, and he steals the entire film.
Yeah,
it's remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. But I was watching. The thing I noticed this time round is how well written it is. It's really well constructed. It's economical. It hangs together. Every scene pushes you to the next scene. Every scene tells you something you need to know. I was watching it. I was thinking, where are the writers now in Hollywood? And in most TV, actually, as well. Well, they're on strike at the moment.
Yeah, it seems so.
Yeah, even that. I mean, I think of 2006 as being not very long ago, and of course, it was nearly 20 years ago.
Reasonable amount of time ago. Yeah.
Yeah. But somehow the art of storytelling. I'm doing it already. I'm a grumpy old man already. I can't help it. But yeah, you don't get popular stories told that professionally anymore.
No, I mean, part of the problem with Constantine, of course, was that it also had a very negative reaction from the fan base, unfortunately, because, of course, it's an adaptation and therefore changed things. And people were not happy about it at all, which is a shame, because it taken as a work in and of itself, it's actually really good.
Yeah.
Because of course Constantine he's supposed to be from Manchester, and he's supposed to look like Sting, and oh no, it's Keanu. Oh, no.
It's Keanu.
He's really good in it.
He is good. It's a really good role. There's been scuttlebutt that there's a sequel in production, isn't there now?
Really?
There's been it's had a bit of a resurgence. People have gone back and I think rewatched it, and they have fond memories of that final sequence with Peter Stormare anyway. And it's had a little bit of a bit of a shot in the arm. So there is another Constantine film set in that universe. So let's see how it goes.
I'm always fascinated how that happens, because I mean, on the weekend, I rewatched for the first time in many years. They Live, John Carpenter's They Live.
Oh, wow.
Which I love, but largely because one of the I have a sort of monthly kind of film night thing with some friends, Vicky and I, and one of us bunch had never seen it, but I think that was by dint of him being the youngest. But reading around it, I mean, that film was properly panned, and then just completely rediscovered, and now its legacy is almost unimpeachable. It's
amazing.
A modern classic.
I mean, that happens a lot with what are considered horror films. Genre film, that happens in an awful amount. The same is true of The Thing.
Yes, of course. That was video, wasn't it? That saved
it. Happened, wasn't it? It happened a lot to John Carpenter.
It happened a lot to John Carpenter. Yes, he was really upset about The Thing as well, wasn't he? Because he actually did feel that he was making like the masterpiece that it is while he was making it. So he was very upset by the reaction to The Thing.
So lucky that.
Is it the thing where he was? Yeah. Oh yeah. That was the first time
speaking. I mean, because it saved The Thing. It completely saved it.
Absolutely. I saw the box, the VHS case, for The Thing. When I was quite a small kid, years before I eventually saw the movie, because the older brother of one of my friends had hired it or something like that. And I remember being absolutely transfixed by the image on the front, which I think is a close-up of the, the screaming face that that erupts from the dying doctor.
Yeah, that was the British VHS box art.
Wow.
Yeah. I think was it The Thing or was it The Fog where Carpenter watched the first cut and he said, no, this isn't good enough, and he put loads of his own money into remounting it to reshoot loads of stuff. I think it was the first. That was The Fog.
Yeah, the first cut of The Fog was by all accounts was appalling. Apparently it was utter trash. It really wasn't good at all. Nobody who saw it liked it, including Carpenter himself. They were all of the opinion that they'd made an absolute stinker. So they redid and quite a significant amount of it, recut it, and we got, ultimately we got the film that we got, which is actually a very, very decent sort of slightly folksy horror film. It's a good film.
Yeah. I think the best thing about it is probably the musical score. I think it's got an amazing musical score.
It really does, and conceptually it's very interesting as well. I really like the way, I mean, it kind of loses it a bit towards the end when you actually start seeing like the pirate ghosts and whatnot. It's a bit silly, but the actual fog itself is a really wonderful concept.
Yeah, just the rolling fog.
Yeah,
and then describing the temperature drops and things like that. That is great. But of course, such a film that much of it works on the fact that the location scouts found that place.
Yeah, right.
It just looks fantastic.
Yeah, it does look amazing.
The steps down to the lighthouse, how long it takes, the fact that you are in LA, but it's so verdant, it's so green. We're so used to over here, I think, thinking of, I mean, California is huge, but it just being pretty much a desert, and of course it isn't. There are these lush quarters and everything in the coastal areas and the more northern areas. And
you wouldn't think it was LA, would you?
No. I mean, if you heard that and you saw the film,
to watch it, you would think it was New England.
Yes,
very much that quality. I think to our eyes this side of not having that detailed understanding of the geography of perhaps people actually live there do, but because we've been presented it the way we've been presented it largely through things like film.
Exactly that. And it's the scale of these states as well, isn't it? Of course there are variations.
Then you think how many times
topography and
the British Isles into California.
Exactly.
Of course it's going to be
of course there are going to be variations in like climate and topography and whatnot. It's like, oh, come on. Yeah.
But how like an Englishman to see everything through the lens of his own overachievement.
Of course. But no, it does happen to Carpenter. A lot of his films really just go under the radar, don't they? Despite his prominence, and it's a real shame.
They sort of, as I say, VHS was, or video rather, because obviously Betamax was still about, was very good for the thing. And I remember a real boon for Prince of Darkness was satellite, because it was one of the very first films that satellite and cable channels in the late 80s got a hold of. So they used to show it a lot. I remember I saw it for the very first time not really that long after it had been in the cinema, and I think again it wasn't necessarily a great box office success.
No,
but it was a bit of a gateway into horror for me as a kid, because it just happened to be on the satellite stations a lot. And we were, I think I might have told this story before, but we were given the short-lived BSB package. We just fell into a kind of, if you take this and fill in the audience reports at the end of a month, you can have a year free.
Oh yes, I remember.
Exactly what my parents went, oh, okay then.
Because at the time, Sky was really expensive, right?
Yeah, well, it was this thing. I mean, BSB, as it was, I know it's now British Sky Broadcasting, because it was meant to be a merger, but it was really a hostile takeover, because it only lasted a year. But BSB made this huge mistake where Rupert Murdoch put out Sky. He got off the starting blocks very, very fast, and the people behind BSB went, why don't we just trim this down to, say, 5 channels and make it like really high quality and a really good, like, and of course they Betamax themselves. It came out, it was better, it had better content, it had a better delivery system. They were too late off the starting blocks, and good old Roops went, Bunions, I'm going to take that. And of course, that's exactly what he did. And one day we switched it on and went, oh, what happened there?
Yeah,
I've taken it.
Oh God.
Same thing that's happened to everything.
Pretty much everything in the world. Yeah. That's depressing. I was thinking stuff like In the Mouth of Madness, which it's one of those Carpenter films that was at the cinema, and it just went away. But it has an incredible reputation. Like, people who are horror fans remember it very, very well, because it was kind of unique at the time. You just didn't get Lovecraftian horror at the cinema at the time.
No. In fact, it almost, to the extent where Carpenter felt like a strange anomaly in 90s.
Yeah.
Populist, horror cinema. It was like, wasn't he? It's odd, because obviously those decades are back to back, but particularly when you've got that young person's perspective as well, where the transition between decades feels really significant. But as Jack was saying earlier, 2006, that was last week, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, it definitely wasn't. It was a long time ago now.
That's because we're old.
Yeah.
Anyway. Dr. Hannibal Lecter.
Oh my God! Wow. I mean, actually, before we came on, I started to think about the scale of this discussion. I mean, this is obviously just going to be an introduction to our experience of that franchise, but it's a bit of a whacking franchise, isn't it? When you look back over it, it's huge. There's a lot going on in it, from books to films to TV series. I'm surprised there hasn't been a musical by now.
I mean, it's certainly going to be, for me, a bit of a deep dive, as I'd said to you in a private message, that I'm very much going to be the sort of junior partner in this, because I've, just to reiterate for the benefit of everyone else who may be listening, I did read the novels, but I've read them once. I've seen Manhunter twice. I've seen The Silence of the Lambs twice.
Wow.
I've seen Hannibal once, not as in the movie.
The film, the Ridley Scott film.
I've also seen the series, which I adored, but I have seen it once. And one of the things I ended up doing with it, I watched it with my partner, is we would watch one episode per month.
Oh, well done.
Because I love the series, and it wasn't because we better get around to watching another episode of Hannibal. It wasn't that at all. The one episode was, I know it's going to be so hard to avoid punning on when doing anything to do with Hannibal, but it was so rich. It provided so many nutrients.
Yes.
That you had so much to masticate on. But the idea, and the third season in particular, which I think in a strange sort of way is my favorite.
Yeah.
That was we just needed that month in between.
You needed the ironically the digestive period.
Yeah. So this is going to be interesting for me, because I'm going to be it's going to be a deep dive for me again, because I feel as though I'm probably the least well equipped.
Right. I mean,
but I'm very much looking forward to it, because I have already said, I've gone on record as saying that that Hannibal is, for me, there with about 4, 5, maybe 6 other television things this century so far, 23 years in, that is absolutely the best thing that we've had.
Yeah, I concur. I just can't get over it. It's
Jack and I
just cannot get over it. It's like,
I have 1 or 2 others as well. I mean, we certainly that first season of The Terror. I was
yes.
I would stand by something like Boardwalk Empire, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power.
She-Ra, obviously,
brilliant.
And Twin Peaks: The Return. I think these are the and Deadwood. I think these are the outstanding series of the 21st century. They're the absolute cream of it.
Well, I can't get over the TV series of Hannibal. I as people on this channel know well enough, because I go on about it enough. I can't get over it. It's like that love affair that just keeps coming back again and again and again and again. You know, that person you just cannot get over for whatever reason. It's unbelievable. I mean, I rewatched it for the purposes of the incoming series that we're going to be doing.
You're so ahead. Well, I'll watch two a week.
I finished it, for the umpteen millionth time, and it's always the same. The dynamic is always the same. I go into it, I devour it, I just glut on it. I just saturate in the bleak romance of it all, and then at the end, I feel bereft.
See, this is interesting on a psychological level, if we're going to sort of start picking up from the series, because clearly, and I'm going to make a crossover between Hannibal and the television series Cracker, because clearly I'm someone who likes sucking boiled sweets and getting every tiny nuance of flavor out. But rather like Francis Dolarhyde, you're a biter, aren't you? You want that instant crunch and suck in all the goodness.
I'd like to think of myself as a Hannibal, really, in some respects.
It's just the oral fixation of Francis Dolarhyde that not that Hannibal's lack.
I love how completely non-deliberately, completely unconsciously, we're just constantly using food metaphors.
You can't help it, can you? You just cannot help it. Not with this show, you can't. It programs you to do it. It completely programs you to do it. And when it comes to puns, I mean, this is Thomas Harris. Everything in Thomas Harris is a pun to a certain degree. All the names certainly are.
Yes, Du Maurier, and we were talking about that briefly.
I mean, I think that's Brian Fuller's invention, isn't it?
Yes, that's not Harris.
Du Maurier. She's a great addition. I mean, Gillian Anderson. Bloody hell! What do they do to her in this show? She doesn't look real. She looks like a Renaissance painting come to life.
Part of that, I think, is performance, because actually Gillian Anderson is quite unusual for an actress of her generation in that she's a fantastic actress, but and she's done a tremendous amount of screen, but she's obviously got a background in the theatre as well, and continue to do theatre. But she's actually rather expressive for an actor on screen, except in Hannibal.
Yeah,
she pulls everything in, and it does have that effect of making her appear unreal.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably playing off Mads Mikkelsen probably enhances that, because he's similarly unreal.
Well, Mads is something else, isn't he? I mean, Mads is
ethereal.
I mean, a lot of actors have played Hannibal at this point. Obviously, there's been quite a few people. Who plays the young Hannibal in Hannibal Rising? Is it it's not Ben Whishaw, is it?
I don't know.
I can't remember. I can remember so.
I've never actually seen the movie Hannibal Rising. I never got around to it.
It's Teflon.
Aaron Thomas, isn't it?
It's completely Teflon. There's like nothing to it. It is as it's impossible to feel anything about. You forget it the instant you've watched it because there is nothing to it. The only thing I can remember about it is a sequence that's actually in the book as well, and the book is absolutely dreadful. Where there is literally at the time Hannibal Rising came out, we also had the new Batman films coming out, the Nolan Batman films, and there is a sequence, honest to God, in Hannibal Rising that is a Batman training montage, just like in those films, where he is like sword fighting with his aunt Muriko, who, because of course she's Japanese, therefore she must be a samurai. It's like, what for the just what? It's appalling.
Well, at least it's admitting that the truth that's always been, well, for a long time anyway, has been tacit, which is that Hannibal Lecter is a kind of superhero.
Is a superhero.
He's a kind of
absolutely, yeah.
Well, kind of evil superhero.
This kind of takes us back to the books, to be honest, because that is exactly how Thomas Harris writes him, and it's deliberate. I mean, it is not a mistake. Right. It is actually deliberate. Even in like way back in Red Dragon, he is like. I mean, the whole thing with Hannibal in the books, anyway, in the book universe, is that he is this fairy tale demon dropped into what is ostensibly a sort of hard-boiled police procedural murder mystery.
Yes, I mean the details.
Yeah,
even when he talks about his maroon eyes,
he's got red eyes.
His sixth finger, which obviously carries a huge connotation. The sixth finger.
Yeah.
Do they
mythologically?
Are they in Red Dragon though? Because as I remember it, the maroon eyes and the sixth finger aren't in Red Dragon.
Right.
I mean, maybe I'm misremembering. My memory of it is that Hannibal gets weirder as the books go on. Like, I agree with what you were saying, George, about Hannibal as kind of a fairy tale figure.
Yeah.
But my memory of the books is that that's something that sort of evolves. He gets more and more peculiar as they go on. In Red Dragon, he's relatively normal.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, his most extreme is in Hannibal, the book Hannibal. In Hannibal, he's superhuman.
It's chicken or egg, isn't it? I mean, is he getting more peculiar, or is he just being more revealed? I mean, but certainly you get that notion of him almost being, and I think it comes through very strongly in Mads Mikkelsen's interpretation, because I know he went into that. I've read he went into the interview with Fuller saying, "Look, I just don't want to do Cox or Hopkins." And,
well, that's wise. That's very wise.
And given what he naturally brings to a situation, even before he, starts to deploying his skill, which is the stuff from God. I mean, the way he looks.
It's not just the way he looks. Either. Have you guys gone back and watched like the makings of the series?
No, I haven't.
It's fucking annoying. No. Apparently, those sequences where he's doing things like he's juggling eggs and he's throwing eggs up.
Oh, but he was. He was a dancer and circus performer in addition to being trained actor. Yeah. I mean, he really is an all-rounder. Ballets, everything. Yeah,
he can dance. But apparently, he can sing a little bit.
This is why this feeds in, because you not only in the sense of you almost get a Luciferian character. I mean, he's Lucifer. He's Milton's Lucifer.
Yeah. He's
Lucifer's Lucifer walking among he's the Nietzschean Übermensch. He's Milton's Lucifer, and he's walking among. But you kind of need someone as accomplished and as beautiful as Mads, and that's why for me he is the definitive version to date, because it always seems to me with Hannibal Lecter as a character that he is he just exemplifies. He's better basically at what humanity does, and he strips away the hypocrisies. He's almost a vice character in the medieval theatre sense, or the Elizabethan theatre sense, where you get this character who he doesn't make distinctions about the meat he eats. He's not a hypocrite. But he does that thing that society does, that history does. Here in this absolute cesspit of war zones, factory farming, the slow horror or rapidly speeding up horror, capital accumulation, genocides, racial supremacy. He gets down and dirty. He kills. He's aggressively violent. But the veneer that society puts over the top of the carnage, he's better at doing. Yeah. He really is the most tasteful man. He really is the most civilized man.
Well, I
and
think
in and of himself, his personal code, whatever you, actually has a certain integrity to it, because he does not make distinctions.
I think that's part of the appeal of the character, even when it's subconsciously understood, isn't it? It's the fact that there is a sort of puncturing of societal and cultural hypocrisy manifested in Hannibal. It's why he's so attractive, and dangerously so, you know? He represents the abandonment of morality for aesthetics, you know, for experience. He doesn't draw distinction between good or bad. It doesn't mean anything to him.
It's beyond good and evil, again, to sort of make an allusion to Nietzsche and everything, but also in that sense of there's some really interesting windows that Thomas Harris in the original text and Fuller in the series really pull on, because he's not a psychopath.
No, I mean
he's too much of an aesthete to be.
Yeah, the books are really problematic in this regard. I mean, the first couple, the Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon, they don't motivate Hannibal, and that is a really clever. That's good. He shouldn't be motivated in that. Certainly not in the way that sort of the other killer characters in the books are. Hannibal, the book, unfortunately goes really, 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 really deep into trying to give him some sort of like Freudian background and motivation, and it really damages the character in the books. It doesn't work at all.
Yes, I agree. It makes him explicable. It makes him human, you know, and it's
well, it
inherently makes it fascinating,
which are interesting.
Like
it murders.
You don't want Cthulhu's sad backstory, you know.
Exactly. It's something we've complained about quite a lot on these shows, actually. You know, this notion that everything needs to be explained, that everything needs a backstory, and the backstories always need to be Freudian in nature. So, you know, there's some trauma in the past that's impacting what people are doing now, and that attempt to make Hannibal Lecter sympathetic. It's like, no, he doesn't need that. He's appealing enough as it is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. I mean, the only thing I would mildly push back on this, and I remember the frustration when I read this, is that, I think we've all often been in accord about this, over-explaining things, hammering out ambiguities, probing the uncanny in a way that tries to make explicit answers to it. And yet, there is a small part of me that loves. It's almost like within that scenario there is something that Thomas Harris almost had, which is, again, it's just over explained, the idea of someone emerging out of the heart, the core of the nightmare of 20th century histories, Barbarossa, for Christ's sake, and you know, the implications and that surround, and the suggestions that surround the people in his life. You know, the Jewish teacher, the Japanese mentor who's from Hiroshima. You know, all these things are really, really interesting. I just don't think he presented them in a way that was sufficiently fascinating, because there's too much sentimentality.
That's right. The bits of the teacup are all there. They just don't come together well, do they? That's the thing.
I think, as with so many things, the TV series does it best, because the TV series takes you into some of this a little way in season 3. It takes you a little into his history, his family history and stuff. You meet his adoptive sister, if I remember rightly.
That's right.
And you go to the Lecter family seat and so on and so forth. But you don't really get all the you don't get all the details that you get in Hannibal the book.
No, in fact, the TV series
and everything you learn
explicitly provides a like the contrary of what the book provides, where, you know, Will Graham actually asks the question, is he motivated by the fact that his sister was cannibalized? And you know, the answer is no. Explicitly not. No.
And of course, in that visual in the visual language that Fuller's using, he then sets up a sort of concatenation of not only those 20th century horrors, but 19th century literary horrors, because obviously you have the European aristocrat who feasts on human blood and meat. I mean, who can he possibly be referring to? But that's really evocative in those sequences.
the third series of the TV series is great because it goes full Gothic. It goes full Eastern European, 19th century castles and Dracula and all this stuff, and yeah, absolutely. And it marries it directly to all these intonations and suggestions about the horrors of 20th century history, Hiroshima and the killing fields of Russia during Barbarossa and the Holocaust and all that stuff. And but it doesn't have that mechanical explainy sense that the book has. So what you end up with is more questions. Everything you learn, everything you see connected to Hannibal's past in the TV series just makes it less explicable.
And in fact, I think it actually shows one of the things that is the real strength of Fuller's Hannibal is that this does seem to be a character in a situation that works better beyond prose, because by its very nature, prose will start explaining too much, and we will end up down the rabbit holes of people's backstories and so on. Whereas, as you've just illustrated, Jack, that sequence, that highly visual sequence, where they with just snatches of dialogue, is so much more compelling. So we end up in this situation where but certainly that adaptation is better than anything that ever went down on the page.
Part of what makes the third season of the TV series work so beautifully, even though it has technically almost all of the elements that are in the Hannibal book, almost all of them, is its framing. I mean, the third season is framed in this highly metaphysical manner. It's almost like it's unreal. Like at the end of the second season, it can be read that they all die. They are all murdered in this horrific bloodbath. And this is some sort of like Dantean descent into a psychological hellscape, where they're all exploring their own souls and psyches, and that helps it massively.
Even the I mean, each season has got a very, very strong color code, but in the third season, the mixing of colors almost reinforces that connotation, really. I mean, the first season is very strongly white, the second season is very strongly blue, and then the third season, yellows, greens, reds, all coagulating. It's like a lava lamp or something. And that disconcerting yellow that is used in the Italian sequences, the Florentine sequences.
I think you're right about Hannibal working better on screen than in prose, just kind of inherently, because I remember in Silence of the Lambs you get a section towards the end of the book, which is told from Lecter's perspective, so to speak. He's on the run because he escapes in that novel, and he's writing a letter to Jack Crawford, and you get this little peep inside his head, and he's irritated by the smell of the waiter's watch strap, and he's listening to the Goldberg variations, and it says he's interested in them structurally and things like that, and he writes this note to Jack Crawford which is full of these spiteful intonations, and thinking about it now, I just think that's really kind of petty and small if you think about it. This is a petty kind of person. He's irritated with very minor things, and he's got no imagination. He's got no appreciation of the actual beauty of the music, and he's spending his time needlessly needling somebody whose wife has just died and stuff. And I know what Harris is trying to do. Harris is trying to reconcile the essentially magical fairy tale character that he's created with his intellectual understanding of what psychopaths are. He's trying to bend and push Lecter into the psychological profile of a psychopath, lacking empathy and all that stuff. And it doesn't work, or at least it works, but it diminishes the character. When you just on film, you can have Mads Mikkelsen just looking at somebody, in that inscrutable way, in that highly attentive, watching, drinking in all the information from somebody's body language, fascinated way that he has, saying nothing, showing no overt emotion, and you just get this it's like watching a predator watch its prey, you know, and you can't guess at what's going on in there.
You're absolutely right, and because of the subtlety of Mads' performance, and it is certainly in the first 2 seasons, it's molecular, his performance. He demonstrates the tiniest fluctuations in emotion. You have to really sort of learn his facial lexicon to understand what's going on. So when you do get those flickers of emotion, and when you learn to interpret them, they're actually tectonic. There's a sequence in season 2 where he's got Mason Verger in his office, and Mason puts his foot up on the arm of the chair, and there is a flicker, the most minute flicker of disgust and distress and annoyance. Across Mads Mikkelsen's face. It is so small that you have to be looking. You really have to be looking to see it. But you know, having seen it, Mason is screwed.
But I think it's one of the things that actually helps him as an actor is that I think the logic behind Lecter's reactions in the series are somewhat better worked out than in the sequence that Jack's just been talking about. So we know, for instance, that rather than in the television series, it's not so much that he is the petty individual who is basically just a snob. We get explicit information that he gets overwhelmed by sensory information. That he has to work through it. Smells, you know, it's like his senses are hyper aware, and therefore he can be. Now that would have been expressed, I think, that the situation with the watch strap, I think would have been expressed far better if that sequence was done in the television series, because it would have been something less to do with this snob who's like, oh, you know, that dreadful man hasn't, you know, washed his wrist before he put on his watch this morning or whatever, and it's more to do with the pain that Hannibal feels on those things. It's painful to him, and also because we also have established that it's rudeness, isn't it? It's this idea of you're letting yourself down, and as soon as you let yourself down, you're well, it's much easier to eat the rude. He says that, doesn't he? Or
absolutely, yes.
You know, if I do make any distinctions, it is that it is easier to eat rude people.
Well, he calls it. He has in. I don't know whether it's in the books or the films, but he has the line in the TV series that he finds discourtesy unspeakably ugly.
Yes.
Unspeakably ugly.
But I think the interesting thing is the way they sort of link that, and strangely, I don't think this does reduce him as a character. It doesn't simmer him down or make too crass an explanation. And I think it's largely also because of the way Mads handles it in performance. Is this idea of that sound, that smell is discomforting.
It's so what Chilton describes very late on. I think it's in season 3 actually. Chilton describes it as his fussy aesthetics, which I really like. What it does in the TV show, because of the way it's framed, it's actually kind of cute. It makes the character, I don't know, it makes him appealing somehow. The fact that he has these little things, these little tics that he likes to keep control of, and that he likes things to be just so.
Well, they are vulnerabilities, aren't they? I mean, it's control, and that loss of control is very painful to him, and it's all there in the stoicism, the presence, the stillness, which of course Du Maurier reflects back at him.
I mean,
she trolls him, basically. That's what she does.
Kind of does. She kind of does. I mean, because I think we are sort of like dipping into the TV series, which is so easy to do. We're going to do that. We're going to get to the episodes. But how did you guys first come across Hannibal, like the Hannibal franchise? Full stop. Where did you first experience it?
Well, for me, it was Silence of the Lambs. I mean, I'd never heard of any of it before Silence of the Lambs came out as a movie, and you know, I was at the age where I was starting to follow films, and it just looked great. You know, it looked like something I really wanted to see. I was desperate to see it. You know, we saw the clips and stuff of Anthony Hopkins, and yeah, it was just something I desperately wanted to see. And I acquired a copy of it. And God, I remember I took it to some sort of, I took it to some sort of party at the house of a girl from school, because I was 16 or so, and we sat and watched it along with, I think it was Hellraiser, actually, we watched as well.
Wow.
There's a double bill.
And there's a double bill.
Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, that's what, and then I read the book Silence of the Lambs, which makes you, of course, want to get the movie Red Dragon, the book Red Dragon,
of course,
because you realize reading the novel that there's a backstory here, because Will Graham is referred to in Silence of the Lambs novel. Yeah. And then Manhunter came on the TV. I think it was a oh God, what was Movie Drome?
Yes,
Alex Cox introduced it. I think.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was definitely Movie Drome. Yeah, I remember that so clearly. And then the third book came out, and I bought that straight away. Yeah, that's how I found it, really. Yeah, I mean, I was not too dissimilar, actually. I mean, when The Silence of the Lambs came out, I mean, I'm a few years younger than Jack, and so to be 11, 12 when that came, it was massive. Yeah. And of course, it was something that
huge hype about it.
Oh, it was massive.
Kids my age would not be able to see, and therefore desperately wanted to see. We certainly wouldn't be able to get into the cinema to see it at that age. We looked too young. But I remember seeing clips of it and the image of Hopkins in the mask.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was incredible. But for me, there's so much in The Silence of the Lambs is a curious film, because actually it's not a film I unequivocally love by any stretch of the imagination.
Me either.
But in a way, I think The Silence of the Lambs kicks off a certain strain of 90s pop culture. The darker underbelly of 90s pop culture. The seed is The Silence of the Lambs. And, I was saying to George earlier, I mean, Clarice Starling, as played by Jodie Foster, gives birth to Dana Scully, and then Gillian Anderson comes back in the Mads Mikkelsen TV series to play a character.
Yeah.
The X-Files is birthed from The Silence of the Lambs. Twin Peaks is concurrent with it, but obviously, so they both have a big impact. And then you're into, the video promos of Nine Inch Nails. Then you're into, this whole. You're into the visceral mutilation horror of the YBA.
And little later on, you're getting things like Seven, for example, which has a direct lineage to Silence of the Lambs.
You're getting Damien Hirst. You're getting Sharks and Formaldehyde. You're getting the scarification of body art of French artists like Orlan and Stellac, I think was Austrian. You're getting Ron Athey mutilation blood in quote unquote fine art or the art world, and I really think that the Silence of the Lambs movie, in its look, in the grist, is just there at the start of, and I think it almost makes sense. This is the 90s. It is, it's just symbolically speaking, it's that era before a new millennium, and symbolically speaking, metaphorically speaking, there is a kind of anxiety. There is a blind panic, just bubbling away under the surface. That you're running towards the end of something. Things are getting. It's the darkness before, hopefully, the light of a millennium, and all that toss. But that's how human beings do function. We have a religiosity that runs through us, even if we don't practice any particular faith.
We think symbolically.
It's neo-pagan.
It's absolutely true. I mean, it's almost like the resurrection of the Gothic for the 1990s, isn't it?
And that's where the 90s is so fascinating. And then to see it played out in its most popular form, which would be the X-Files, really, because that dominated television culture in the 90s, almost like nothing else. The magazine covers, it was just almost a lifestyle.
Not just, it really was almost. I would say it absolutely was. It wasn't just like it wasn't just television culture that the X-Files influenced, or that it expressed actually. Because we had that cultural resurgence of interest in the unexplained, in the quote unquote paranormal. So things like alien abduction stories were huge at the time, and alien encounter stories, ghost stories, all of that was enormous in the mid 1990s.
Yeah, and it just seems to be at the start. It's not to say something as direct as, oh, this is the thing that kicked it off. It's just it was right there, and so there was something in the air, and I remember the enormous buzz around it and the excitement, and but just with Lecter as a character, and they said the iconography of the mask and him being wheeled around on the stretcher and bound up, and I couldn't see it. And therefore, when I finally did see it, which was on a VHS, then rather like you, Jack, it was like, right, I now need to devour the books. And I saw, again, as the Manhunter was definitely a movie drone, because I remember I used to watch movie drone with my father. My mother didn't like the films of movie drone. I think largely because she got particularly traumatized by one of the films in the season was Race with the Devil, and then there was a scene where cobras were inside a camper van, and that just finished. She was like, I'm not watching any more of these. But I remember watching that one with my dad, finding that even at the time a very, very strange movie. I like it, actually. I like Michael Mann's film more than the Hopkins one.
I think it has more staying power. I think it's aged better. It's aged way better.
But it's aged in an interesting way, because it's very clearly the 80s, but it's that a sort of strange lens on the 80s, where all the fashion, the set design, the art direction, everything screams the 80s, but there's a real still.
That's what I get from it. It's restrained, isn't it? It has this restrained quality, which is very not 1980s.
No. Yes, there's none of the bombast that many of the sort of horror thrillers had.
Even Cox's performance is really understated. It's really quiet when you compare it to Hopkins' basic pantomime villain in Silence of the Lambs. There's an emptiness. There is this wonderful coldness to
I've said many times, though, that in fairness to Hopkins, because Hopkins is a tremendous actor, but I really do believe that he turned up on the day and saw the set. Right. I have to play it like that, do I?
We're going to play it like we're in some kind of medieval fantasy, right?
Cox won out because he was just in a sort of standard cell, so he was able to just to play everything straight down the line, and the horror in his Lecter is it's just like, oh, it's just this kind of okay middle-aged bloke, but oh my god, that's unsettling. I feel slightly sorry for Anthony Hopkins, because I just think, what do you do? Those are your signifiers.
It's a strange thing, isn't it? The set in The Silence of the Lambs is ostensibly ridiculous, isn't it? It's absurd when you consider that this is supposed to be a psychiatric unit.
Well, the film is kind of stymied by the fact that you get that set, and yet everything cocooning that sequence is played as a kind of hypernaturalism. It's like, no, this is wrong. if that's your set and that's your opening sequence, this film should be much more stylized, should be much more operatic. In a sense, the sequel, which although is flawed, I think in some ways is more successful because it plays up the operatic qualities of
the Dantean sort of Florentine elements, the romantic elements, the illusions that are all the way through the series. It just goes for it. This is a romantic film.
And once you have Ray Liotta monologuing while his brain's being eaten, you've just got to go with it, really, haven't you?
Yeah, Gary Oldman having a fine old time in that makeup, just loving every second of it, Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I was even young. I'm even younger than you, Elliot. So I was a kid when Silence came out. I was actually
could have got away with it if it wasn't for these kids.
Yeah, that was. I was in single digits when Silence came out, and but I still remember. Obviously, well into my horror by that point. So I remember the hype around it. I remember seeing
kids talked about it in playgrounds as if it was something they'd seen.
Yeah,
you would. Trying to find pictures in magazines and everything, and people were telling lurid stories to each other about, oh, my elder brother's seen it, or someone of my, and the you almost felt like you were dealing with a snuff movie by the time.
Very there were a lot of films in like the later 1990s that were like that. Things like The Candyman, which became mythological on the playground. So people would claim they had a pirated video of it or something, and they would, they would make up lurid stories about what was in it. Which obviously,
but I think this had the added thing of I think there was a certain verisimilitude to it, because it's all true stories. It's all stuff that's really happened. That was really believed. It was, and I don't think that particular thing had been tapped into for a long time, because although we were excited and aroused even by the horror that we couldn't get to see as kids at that time, whether it was a Nightmare on Elm Street movie or whatever it was, some part of you knows it's fantasy, whereas this had that extra cash, because it was, this is about a serial killer, and they're drawing on stories that have happened. That whole thing that created the extra frisson.
Yeah, I mean, it was a phenomenon at the time, wasn't it? You were getting this sort of efflorescence of the crime drama or the police procedural. There were a lot of sort of like ex-lawyers and ex-solicitors, like Thomas Harris himself, who were writing about their experiences or making fiction out of their experiences. People like John Grisham, I think, were having their heyday at the time. James Patterson was obviously very big at the time. What Harris does, of course, is that he marries these lurid horror elements to that, and so you get Hannibal dropped in, who is so oddly incongruous with the world in which he operates that it makes him fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think the theme of trying to reconcile Hannibal with the real world is something that really dogs the novels.
It really does,
because the first novel is obviously, I mean, part of what it's about is the whole idea of the FBI profiler, which was a very exciting, relatively new idea at the time. So it comes up with this character, Will Graham, who's supposedly like the ultimate profiler. He can think the way the killers think. I mean, in real life, that doesn't really help, working out how the killers, A, it doesn't really help to think the way they think, and B, there's no great trick to it, to be honest, because these people are not complicated in real life.
It's absolutely true.
But I've said this before, one of the weird things about the Red Dragon novel is that it sets up the idea that Will Graham has kind of this hyper ability to put himself in the mind of a killer, because he can sort of empathize with everybody, and it gives him special insights. And then he doesn't really do that.
He doesn't do it. No, in the novel, it tells you in like the first sequence. It tells you this, and it's very. I mean, the novel is very blunt force trauma. It's really explicit. It basically has conversations where people say, "Oh, yes, he does this and he can do that," and then he doesn't do it like at all.
I mean, like in the Brett Ratner film, which I think is awful, to be honest. After Dolarhyde goes to the museum and eats the Blake print, and Will Graham is talking to Jack Crawford. Will Graham comes up with the idea that it means Dolarhyde is trying to stop. It's not Will Graham in the novel. It's somebody. I think it's Bloom,
somebody else,
who of course who gets gender swapped in the TV show.
Yeah.
So it's really strange how he it's like he's setting up something very interesting and kind of inherently, something that dances on that dividing line where you're not. It's the dividing line between the real and the fantastical. Like Todorov's Divisions.
Yeah.
And then shying away from it and sort of desperately pulling back.
Absolutely. There's almost like a magic realist quality, right?
Yeah, but he's not. It's like he's not comfortable with it. It's like he goes a certain way down that road with Will Graham, or he goes a certain way down that road with Hannibal, even with Dolarhyde, actually, in that novel. And then it's like something in him kind of goes, put the brakes on, reverse.
Yeah, don't commit to it.
Yeah, got to crowbar this back into realism because I want this to be like a novel where all the details about FBI profilers are correct and all the forensic details got to be correct and stuff like that. And I think he gets a bit more relaxed about that as things go on. Like The Silence of the Lambs, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that's where Lecter acquires his maroon eyes and his sixth finger.
Right. I don't also think believe that's when he starts developing his superpowers as well.
Yeah, exactly. And he starts to be one of the things about Lecter in Red Dragon is that he comes over as just small-minded and petty.
And he's not in it very much.
He has some interesting lines here and there. He's not in it very much, but when he is in it, he has some interesting lines here and there. But everything he does and says seems like he's just taunting Will Graham just for fun, just for sadistic pleasure.
Yeah.
And he tries to manipulate Dolarhyde into killing Will and Will's family and stuff like this. And you look at that, and certainly by the standards that are set in our conception of the character of Hannibal Lecter now, certainly by the TV series,
yes,
it seems so petty and small-minded. Yeah. It seems so unimpressive.
Yes, that's
by the time you get to, and Silence of the Lambs, the novel is better because he has a more interesting interlocutor in Clarice Starling.
Yes, yeah,
and he does start to become a little bit more relaxed about Hannibal being basically supernatural. And then by the time you get to Hannibal, he's kind of he's able to sort of tell who's standing on the other side of the door, just by sniffing, and he can distinguish different people's pheromones from each other and things like this. So it's getting bonkers, frankly. But at least he's getting less concerned about that rather dry realism.
I think that's probably one of the joys of an author not being having the fullest grasp of their own work in some respects, or the best grasp of their own work.
Oh, absolutely.
Because one of the things that comes across, and presumably it's Fuller, or is that whatever his interpretation of these books has been, he's picked up on certain things and he's just run with his interpretation. And I think I always get this sense with Fuller's work on this is that he's taken the idea from Lecter, the line from Lecter about everything according to design, and he's run with that, and therefore it's then you get that much more interesting story of the relationship with Will Graham being one of I mean it's virtually Pygmalion. I'm giving you the tools by which you can you leap beyond yourself, and he kind of does that all the way throughout the series with his favorites, and then anyone who doesn't maximize their potential, of course, he has disdain for. I just think in that sense that yes, go on, sorry.
You get the feeling that he genuinely likes Will Graham, even loves him on his own terms.
Absolutely,
this is not like the rather one-dimensional monster that's in the novels, particularly Red Dragon, and in the Hopkins movies. He's not capable of such feelings. He's never loved anybody. No. Whereas the Mikkelsen version, he does feel love because he's not just this. He's not. They're not trying to crowbar him into the paradigm of the psychopathic murderer who lacks empathy and stuff. That's one of the great lines in the TV series is acts of cruelty require a great level of empathy, which is something I've always thought. It's kind of the official line on
you have to relish sadism.
Yeah, exactly. The official line with people like FBI profilers is that they do what they do because they lack empathy. Well, how can you enjoy inflicting pain if you can't imagine what another person is feeling? I don't get that.
And also, he's a psychiatrist, for Christ's sake.
Right.
I mean, he's about probing people's emotions as well. Yeah. It's all there. It's in the text.
That's another thing that Harris tries to lampshade. He actually has like an exchange between Lecter and Clarice Starling in The Silence of the Lambs, where she says, "Why don't you analyze yourself?" or something like that. And he's lampshading it. Yeah. Because it's kind of inherently bizarre, the idea that somebody could be a psychiatrist, and of course he's got to be a brilliant psychiatrist. He's got to be much better than Chilton,
the
for
best.
instance. He's got to excel, and have no insight into his own behaviour, which you absolutely get the feeling that the Hopkins Lecter doesn't have. But yeah, it's the TV Lecter, the Mickelson Lecter, genuinely loves Will, whatever that means to him, whatever his experience of love is.
And he doesn't know. The interesting thing is he's wrestling with it. Certainly in the opening of the third season, when he's in Florence, he has many exchanges with both Bedelia and with Will, where he expresses that he doesn't really know how to deal with this. He doesn't know what the outcome is going to be.
I don't want to play down the any romantic connotation just for the sake of it, but I think that I always get a strong sense, because I don't think these things have to be separate and therefore one cancels out the other. But I always get the sense that because it is pretty explicit in the television series that Will Graham says, he is asked by Crawford, I think, as memory serves, about if he's on the spectrum. And he says something like, I lean more towards the Asperger's autism than I do this. He makes a joke out of it than I do out of the criminal psychopath. But there's almost this sense of it's Lecter's desire to make Will a sensualist on top of his other talents, and that if he can bring him, that seems to be almost his project as well. I think it's bubbling away with other things, but it's like I want you to, I don't want you to fulfill the rather obvious definition of someone who lacks empathy. We can make you a sensualist. We can do this together, and it's almost like the two lines in the television series that always stick in my head. One is this thing about everything is about, from Lecter's point of view, everything is about design. Even the mind palaces that he retreats into, everything is about design. And he has a design for Will. And I think the other one, just going right back to the top of the conversation we had, which is really, what is Lecter? Who is Lecter? Is Lecter a man? Is Lecter something more? And it is a line by du Maurier, which as you say, George, is created for the television series. And she says, they have this exchange, and Lecter says, what am I guilty of? And she says, I can't say. I've had to draw a conclusion based on what I've glimpsed through the stitching of the person suit that you wear.
Oh, that comes up again and again and again.
And
there is this constant.
That is and that's the point. The fact that the line keeps coming up, or variations on that line, there it is. She has an insight. You're not just a man.
Well, one of the things that makes the show so appealing is its utter rejection of orthodoxy, and that is manifest in Hannibal and in Will, actually. Whenever they are discussed, either of them, whenever there is an attempt to define what they are, certainly psychologically, the line that comes up is, there is not yet a word for what either Will Graham or Hannibal Lecter actually are. In fact, Hannibal in the third season, it's played for laughs, it's played as a joke, but Chilton, obviously, he launches Hannibal's legal defense. He's part of Hannibal's legal defense, and Hannibal's legal defense is that he's insane. He's a pure psychopath, and therefore not entirely responsible for his actions. But Hannibal writes an excoriating rebuttal of Chilton's defense, which hinges upon the fact that he is not a psychopath. He knows exactly what he's doing, And
I think that actually comes across as it's one of the standout scenes in the third series for me. And I remember saying, that's it. That's kind of him in a nutshell. And it's him and du Maurier. And I as I say, I've only seen all this once, so I can't remember who the person is they have to dine with them. But he puts a bolt from a bolt gun in his head, and she pulls it out. And he says, well, technically, you killed him. And it's fantastic. It's all there. It's all there in that moment. It's about design. It's about how he pushes people along. He does with her what he does with Will. But there's always a sense that they don't lose their agency. They kind of want it.
Yeah,
they want to go on that journey to a degree.
There's another sequence like that in the television show where I can't remember which episode it's in, but it's one where two men come to Lecter's rooms to kill him,
Yeah.
I can't remember why or who sent them or whatever, but he has a physical fight with them, and he jams something into the side of one of the men's thighs, into his leg, and what he's done is he's jammed it straight into the femoral artery, and the guy goes to pull it out, and Lecter actually says, "I wouldn't pull that out. I
wouldn't do that."
And of course the guy does, and he just dies almost immediately because there's his body just empties of blood through the femoral artery, and it's like. Again, Lecter has kind of put the guilt for the man's death onto him.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's one of the wonderful things about the show, because the show kind of does motivate Hannibal to a certain degree, but not in the very blasé way that Thomas Harris does. He wants to see what's going to happen. That is Hannibal's creed in the show. He's kind of his entire religion, his philosophy is one of causality. He's interested in seeing potential. What's going to happen if I push here, or if I pluck this string here? It's
Lear, isn't it? As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, and Hannibal sees himself as a god. In some respect, he is. Well, we can either make that case for him being the sort of Miltonian Lucifer or whatever, but it's definitely that thing. Well, I can stir up the red ants and the black ants if I wish to.
I think he's interested more. I think
see how they respond.
Again, it's kind of made explicit. He's interested in sort of spitting in the eye of God. It's this entire rejection of orthodoxy.
Sense of the Miltonian view rather than of him being, a god. And
what he sees in this. Sorry, go on, Joe.
You do get this strange sense, at least I do, watching the television series, that he's kind of on our side, and there is something satanic about that. I mean. One of the great we were talking earlier about Constantine. There's another late 90s Keanu Reeves movie called The Devil's Advocate. Again, Keanu Reeves finds himself talking to the devil, and this time it's Al Pacino. But the devil in that actually says to him, "I'm a friend to man. I'm a humanist because I want
the last humanist."
The things, I want you to do the things that you love, the things that make you happy and stuff like that. And you get the feeling that there's something about that sort of the Luciferian humanist about the TV Hannibal. I mean, he does some dreadful things, but most of the time, the people that he plays with are generally very unsympathetic. That's the thing that the show keeps coming back to. This whole idea of him only
Freddie Lounge, Chilton, my God, these people, these damn people.
Jack Crawford.
Jack Crawford.
Yeah. He's a very bad guy in this show.
Yeah. He will go there. It's like we won't, most of us, because we won't take that step. And it's like he does it for us. It's like he says,
absolutely.
I don't like this person either. I'll get rid of him for you.
It taps into something that we all secretly. But it's that interesting, because if Fuller had done this as a film, you've just given me the idea, Jack. If Fuller had done this as a film, I mean, Mads Mikkelsen is a quite big actor. He's a film actor, but it was easier to get him in something on television because. But now I'm like getting, oh my God! If someone had the inspiration to actually cast Keanu as Hannibal Lecter in a film version, rather than an Anthony Hopkins, rather than someone, because the thing that they do share, both Keanu and Mads Mikkelsen, is that similar ethereal otherness.
Yeah, it's that poise.
And that blankness, I mean that could have been something. I mean, I'm glad they got Mads.
Absolutely.
I think if Fuller had secured a big film deal for a new film, I would have actually been quite that would have been an interesting bit of casting.
I mean, it's fascinating for me now, to be honest. I mean, with this television show, I do think that this television show is like the epitome, the very apotheosis of this franchise, if you like. And I'm finding it very difficult to understand how it could be possible to make another adaptation and make it work.
I'm still slightly amazed that this was even made.
I can't get over it. It is, for me, it's a televisual miracle.
Because it shouldn't have come out like this.
No.
You know, when you think of the pitch, and when you think of what were surely the conversations about capitalizing on the success of things like The Silence, what should have turned out was a piece of crap. It should have been like a Bones or something.
That's exactly it.
Well, it should have been awful. And something happened.
One of the things about the TV series is that it kind of cosplays as that kind of show.
Yes.
It spends a lot of its time sort of pretending to be CSI Baltimore.
Yeah.
You know, because it has like this cast of characters, you know, the two forensic scientists, one of whom is Scott Thompson. I mean, and you have the other agent, and then you have Will and Jack Crawford and Bloom, and then you have Hannibal, the consultant psychiatrist. And so you have a regular cast of people, and they come back every week. In the first season, it's very much like this, to investigate the crime of the week. And there's and they unmask the killer by the end. And there's also a running storyline where secretly the consultant psychiatrist that's helping the team is actually the big serial killer they're looking for.
And we're ahead. We as an audience
sounds
are
really
ahead.
schlocky.
Yeah,
but that's one of the things that makes it not that, because we know all the time, because we know who this character is, or we think we do. But it spends a lot of time pretending to be like that cheesy forensic, you know, propaganda show.
Yep.
And it dresses in those colors a lot of the time, while it's also doing things that are much more interesting.
And really subversive.
The supernatural elements to it. Yeah, I mentioned Todorov before. He himself says that the texts that fit into the uncanny, as he defines it, they're very few and far between. And this is an example, and I think they're even fewer and further between on television, where it refuses to collapse down on either side. It's because he says the uncanny is the hesitation in our belief between do we believe it's supernatural or do we disbelieve that it's supernatural, and then it falls down onto one or the other side. And this series just maintains that hesitation all the way through. It's its default state. Because it spends its entire time suggesting that there is something supernatural or extra natural about Hannibal. Particularly, you have Will's visions, and again, it spends the entire series suggesting that Will's. I mean, it goes into the idea that he has this empathy power, unlike the books, and then it makes them. He has like these surreal visions, and it could be that he's having psychic visions, which means that it could be when he sees Hannibal as like the Wendigo creature, that he's actually seeing underneath the person suit, that he's seeing what's actually in there, that Hannibal actually is a Wendigo or a demon or something like this. And it refuses to either play that up, because nobody actually talks about this. Nobody at any point says, you know, Will Graham might be psychic or Hannibal might be a demon. That's not, that discussion is not part of the discourse of the show. And yet the show keeps on showing you things that inevitably make you feel like that might be happening. And it just carries on throughout the entire series, refusing to be confronted, refusing to be answered. That's quite remarkable.
It is,
and one of the reasons it can get away with that is that it is on some level pretending, kind of for the TV execs, to just be another. Another forensic.
The way it's
top show.
It's phenomenally marketable in that regard. You can see how they snuck under the radar with it, because there's a lot in this show that I am shocked by consistently. Part of it is the graphic violence. The scenes of mutilation are elaborate and grotesque and artistic, and most dangerously, they're incredibly beautiful for the most part.
Well, this is the extraordinary thing, because it is almost a colossal sleight of hand trick in that it does all those things. I mean, it is aggressively marketable in that, you know, this is everything we've just talked about, the sort of police procedural, murder of the week, and because of its existing success as a movie franchise, this must have been the easiest sell in the world. And yet I'd love to have been those execs when episodes were taken in. They must have on some level been going, this isn't quite what we signed up for, but it's got all the things that we agreed between us would be in it. And
just going back,
but then I think actually the impact of it is, sadly, is that in order, having achieved that, having used, and in a sense, it's not a million miles from what Thomas Harris does in the books, which is take schlock and be indulgent with it and a bit pretentious.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying these things in a pejorative sense. I think that's good. I think that schlock should always be done that way. And
pretension is great.
Of course, and the same with the with the television series. It's clearly pitched itself as being something very, very marketable. That's that can pull in the ratings, and of course it subverts that completely. And almost inevitably, what does that mean? The ratings go down, and it sort of limps to the finishing line. Although that being said, I do actually think this is one of those series which, although the potential is clearly there for it to carry on, I like the way it ends.
All right, I don't ever want to see a season 4. There are calls for it all the time. There's even been suggestions that it's happening at some point. I never, ever, ever want to see a season 4 for this show.
I quite like that rupture. It's a more satisfying rupture of the narrative than maybe something like Deadwood, another series I adored. I mean, Deadwood, you can kind of understand why they did, albeit 14, 15 years later, make the 2-hour wrap-up film, because it ruptures in such a strange place in the narrative.
It just stops.
It just sort of, I mean, well, it's actually some things are coming to crescendo. I mean, it's the point where Hearst is basically going to turn the Pinkertons onto them, and it stops. But with Hannibal, it's like, no, it can rupture here successfully if it needs to.
Well, everything comes together, doesn't it? Thematically, everything comes together. You have those, oh my God. I mean, we will get to it when we do the episode, but my God, I fall off my chair. Those last lines, I fall off my chair every time. It's like the anime thing of the guy spurting blood out of his nose, It really is. This is all I ever wanted for us, Will.
Yeah.
Holy fuck.
Yeah.
Holy fuck. It's the most erotic violence I've ever seen. One of the things that people do have a go at the show for sometimes is the fact that they don't ever consummate their relationship sexually. And I'm like, no, of course they don't. That belies the point. That kind of belies the point. Their relationship is on another level. It operates in this sort of psychosexual space where the blades and the knives and the bites and the mutilations are their fucking. That's the sex.
I don't want to take away, imply taking away the gay from this series, because of course it is an incredibly gay series, and it's great. It's
gay,
enormously
it's totally gay.
To its benefit. But at the same time, obviously the relationship between Will and Hannibal in the television series is a romance. It absolutely is a dance of mutual attraction and mutual love, actually. But at the same time, it's not. I think it's reductive to just think of it as like a gay relationship, because really, in whenever this was made, 2017, 2018, I suppose it was made. There's no need to do it in code anymore. No, you could just, if you wanted to show a gay relationship, you could just show it. Whereas in the past, of course, you have texts like this that incredibly imply gay desire or gay love and so on in ways that never actually get explicit about it per force, because they can't talk about these things explicitly. This doesn't need to do that. So something else is going on here. And it is because like a physical, sexual, romantic relationship is kind of, they're beyond that. Yep. They're into something more metaphysical, or at least Hannibal thinks that they are.
It's mind to mind, isn't it? It's soul to soul. That's what this is. This is
the queer baiting argument becomes it's like no. There are a lot of things which we can genuinely and legitimately say that's queer baiting or this, but I think this no. You have to nuance it around this show, because it's all there in the text. It's all there in the dialogue about what Hannibal, particularly by his design, yet again, is trying to achieve. For Will,
the notion of the fact that Will just happens to be the same sex as Hannibal doesn't even it wouldn't even occur to Hannibal, I don't think. He admires and adores in Will his uniqueness. It's the potential artistry of the man, the art that he perceives in his unique psychology, you know.
And frankly, sorry, go finish your thought, please.
No, go on.
You see Hannibal's fascination with and his desire to be understood by Will. You see it directly reflected back at him by one of his patients in series 1, the guy who comes to him and is kind of obsessed with him. He's sort of almost becoming a stalker, you know. And he obviously he desperately wants Hannibal to notice him as a person. He wants Hannibal to understand him. He wants to get close to him. And there's a feeling, again, Michelson suggests it with very, very slight gestures and slight intonations, but you get the feeling that Hannibal is very uncomfortable with that. And he gets rid of the guy because he's very uncomfortable with it. And I think it's because it reflects back to him something that he's feeling, except that to him it's small and petty. Mm-hmm. So the fact that it looks a little bit like how he feels about Will, it's like it degrades it.
Yes,
but that's what he wants. He wants Will to see him.
Yeah,
and his whole life depends upon hiding. He has to hide. I mean, this is another way in which it's incredibly gay coded. He has to hide who he is and what he does. Yeah. But at the same time, he wants people, particularly the people he cares about, to see and know and understand him.
Yes, Du Maurier points this out to him, doesn't she, in one of her sessions? She says it's nice sometimes to be seen. It's good for us. It's good for you to take off the person suit occasionally. Yeah. And he actively pursues Will, of course. I mean, he turns up at his doorstep in season 1 with breakfast.
He does,
it's like, you don't do this often, do you, Hannibal? And of course, Will is completely dismissive of him, as dismissive as Hannibal is of his obsessive patient. Initially, anyway.
And then Hannibal does dreadful things to Will. He convinces him that he's a murderer. He gets him convicted of murder and things like that. But there's always this feeling like Hannibal is just, that's all, to him, that's all part of the, it's like that's all part of the flirting. That's all part of the relationship. Yeah. You know, it's another way to get close to him, to you know, he's a connoisseur of experience. That's something you were getting at before, Elliot, you know, with his intense hypersensitivity. You get the feeling that he's like this connoisseur of human life, you know, and he feels far distant from the Thomas Harris's attempt to crowbar the character into the FBI profiler's mold of the kind of dumb, empathy lacking psychopath. Yes. He's hyper aware of everything, including human emotions and human thoughts. And it's all, to him, it's like creating a beautiful meal. It's like, well, what shall I make now? What shall I make now from all these ingredients? How will it taste when, you know, that's what it's like.
Well, the food is subtle and elaborate. The mind palaces are subtle and elaborate. The long game with Will is subtle and elaborate. It's, you know, it's a real through line. You know, he's a consistent character all the way through.
Well, it's something the show does visually a lot. You get a lot of crossfades in this show where you're going from the scenes of elaborate murder where art has been made out of mutilated bodies to Hannibal's table, of course, where you have food, which is equally elaborate. And that is all the way through. It's the art, it's the music, it's the food, it's the murder is just another tapestry. It's another medium in this series.
Yeah. And food, really, cooking is really art as it's presented in this. It's a high art. You know, it's not just the culinary arts. It's presented in the same way that painting or music is represented.
Well,
really artistic expression.
Yeah, it's interesting the way Hannibal talks about it, because he used to be a surgeon as well, didn't he, at one point? He's talking to Will at one point where he says he gave it up because too many patients died on his table and he didn't like the imperfection of it. So, and I get the impression that's true. That's probably true. So he channeled his passion into the culinary arts.
Whereas it's a far cry from the rather crude one-dimensional picture that you get in the books, certainly the earlier books and the Hopkins movies, where he just comes over he just comes over as bougie, you know.
Yes, that is it.
Yes.
That is it. It's he comes across as a snob. He comes across, but it's interesting because in a way, I wonder if Thomas Harris almost had this fantastically inspired idea for a character, but because, as we've alluded, the reality for of a number of serial killers, certainly documented serial killers, and one thinks about the interviews with Nielsen, for example, and of course the revelation is always how fantastically dull and self-absorbed,
boring they are.
And then of course we are now presented with a character in this fictional context who is anything but. And it's almost like I don't know whether sort of you were saying earlier, Jack, about Harris has this tendency to slam on the brakes, the screeching of brake fiber, and almost if he stops believing in his own great idea at times, and then, as you say, has to lampshade it, and then the tendency is for, maybe as in The Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal to come out as a bit too bourgeois, and it's and somehow through some work of alchemy, the television series has managed to deal with all these things.
Mm-hmm.
It's just managed to either go, well, we'll ignore X, and we're not going to make him this sort of petty character, who's just basically a glorified wine taster, a sort of gourmand, basically, somebody who would really rather be visiting restaurants and hotels and giving them, Egon Ronay who kills, basically. I've taken it into a completely different dimension, and then having the inspired casting that helps. I mean, across board, I must have, because Hugh Dancy, I've got reasons to hate Hugh Dancy. Two big ones. Number one, he married Claire Danes.
Claire Danes, yeah.
Number two, he was basically discovered by the Hubbards, who are the biggest casting directors in the UK, serving a cappuccino in a coffee shop. So I hate it. Because I had to suffer the humiliation of drama school. And
what's really annoying? He's very good, isn't he?
But this is good. Also, it's the added problem of Will Graham, certainly as he's presented in this series, is an virtually impossible character to play.
Yep.
Because you've got to be emptied of emotions, and actors thrive on the chance of showing emotions and intentions, and your agency is basically taken up by other people quite a lot, whether it's Crawford manipulating you, whether it's Hannibal manipulating you, and it's a really good performance.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a complex performance as well.
People just get it all, don't they?
Right.
Some people get it all handed to them,
Right.
There he is, and
has one of those
somebody just just rocks up to him and says, "Hey, you're incredibly beautiful. Do you want to be a movie star?" And he says, "Oh yeah, okay then." And he says, "Oh, I've got to try my hand at this acting thing," and he turns out to be really good at it. The rest of the world is just like, "Oh, for fuck's sake!"
It's annoying, isn't it?
There you go.
He's got one of those 50p faces as well, which is like really annoying. Where all the angles and planes are perfect. And every time I see him, I just immediately go into the young ones. I hate him. He drinks like a fish. He's got no talent. Hugh.
Well, I mean, to stand up against Mads Mikkelsen's performance, you would need it, wouldn't you? You need something really special there. And again, it's part of the alchemy of the show. Every piece of casting is incredible.
Yeah,
Mikkelsen's actually a really generous performer.
Incredibly so.
It's a funny thing to say. It probably sounds like a funny thing to say, but this is also true of Christopher Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher Lee obviously was very imposing. He was very tall. He had that face. He had that deep voice, etc., etc. He had that whole Christopher Lee thing going on.
Yeah.
And he can turn it on when he needs to, when he's being Dracula or Saruman or whatever. He turns it on, and it's, you can't look at anything else. He dominates the screen. But he can and does also turn it off. And he does this when he's he does this with Cushing in The Skull and in Horror Express. And he does this pretty in loads of films, actually, where he tones it right the way down, or he goes for vulnerability. And you get the feeling that he's consciously making space for the other actors to do their thing, so that they're not. It's like he's aware of the risk of overshadowing people, and I think you get that with
because he's got those obvious things
well.
that would.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah. It's being aware of those attributes, or which can easily crush another actor.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that Tom Baker refuses to do, in certainly in the later series of Doctor Who, and it's a problem. It's a real problem. He insists upon dominating every people.
In pretty much everything he's been in, to be honest. He goes big in everything. Does Tom Baker? And
yet, you see him in those earlier stories.
Mickelson makes his performance fit around other performers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very telling, isn't it? Because we came on to this episode to discuss our background with like the original Hannibal franchise, so the books, the films, and largely we've spoken about the series. And the reason for that is because it does just overshadow them all, doesn't it?
It really does.
It
should,
so
because it's a Johnny come lately. I mean, it is, really. As it's the series that came out because that's the thing to capitalize on.
Yes, I avoided it. I avoided it when it first came out. I avoided it like the plague. I was still very much, after Hannibal Rising and Hannibal and all that bullshit. I was like, no, I'm not interested in this franchise anymore. I'm really not interested in this franchise anymore. It's gone. It's destroyed. It's dead. TV series based on Hannibal. That's not going to be any good.
And I must admit, there was nothing necessarily in Fuller's over that really suggested to me, oh well, he's going to be a sort of great architect. No. I mean, he was. I mean, I didn't particularly like the Heroes series, but I mean, of course, that was bollocksed by the writers' strike, and then
100% fair.
And then he was like, I think he was a writer on Star Trek Voyager, which I found incredibly dull, and so it's like, well, there was nothing in his sort of pedigree really that made me think. But by God,
I came to it incredibly late. I remember. I think I was just arbitrary. I needed something to watch. And it's like, oh, I'll give it a go. I'll have a look at the first episode and see what it's like. Wow.
You're right. We conceived of this episode as kind of here come the food metaphors again, like an entree or an aperitif and a amuse-bouche for the rest of the series, which is hopefully going to be us going through the television series, which we want to do, sort of a couple of episodes at a time, maybe.
Yeah.
And this was kind of the intro episode where we were going to talk about sort of Hannibal in general as a cultural phenomenon, and we have spent a lot of time talking about this TV series. But I think do you guys have thoughts on this? I mean, one of the interesting things to me is that you have, Hannibal Lecter, he was kind of tried, wasn't he, in Michael Mann's Manhunter?
Yep.
And it didn't catch the public imagination the way it did later on with Hopkins. I mean, whatever you think about that performance, I look at it now, to be frank, and I think it's rather silly.
Yes,
certainly as it goes. Well. Certainly when you get, I mean, in the movie Hannibal, the Ridley Scott movie, he's kind of in sync with the whole style of the film, which is kind of incredibly silly overall. Mm-hmm. But then they get him back to do Red Dragon, the prequel Red Dragon, and it's really, really over the top. You get the feeling that Hopkins is taking the piss out of the material.
Yeah, he just doesn't care. He's got to that point where he doesn't care.
Yeah. And but even in his best performance as Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, it's very mannered, it's very over the top, it's very strange in many respects.
Yep.
But it did catch the public imagination. So, what is it about the character? And certainly, why is it very specifically originally the Hopkins version of the character that caught the imagination of so many people? I mean, I have my own thoughts on this, but what do you guys think?
I think the iconography around him helps a great deal. Like I said, when as a kid, seeing the mask, the hair slicked back. I mean, I didn't even hear a word. Him strapped up and being moved around on the trolley in the upright position. All those things are, they sear through. I think also, Hopkins does carry an enormous amount of weight, as in most things he has been really bloody brilliant. I think also maybe at that time as well, there was a certain, oh, right, because he had done things like The Remains of the Day. He had done these sort of, these rather stately, you know, if he was on film, he was, and then suddenly he had the chance to be unleashed.
By the way, shows that he can turn it down when he wants to.
Oh, absolutely.
Incredibly
yes.
Or like, even though it's, what's the 84 Charing Cross Road, things like that, he'd been very associated with that kind of role on screen. He was doing all sorts on stage, but for a long time, and I think there's maybe a zeitgeist thing in there. We do like to see actors we associate with one thing somewhat unleashed, and we kind of want to see them succeed at it as well. And I think probably because he just stamped on it very, very hard, and there was no real precedent.
I think that's it. You know,
it worked at the time, but I think the more repeat viewings one has of it, or as time has moved on, it, you know, I think now it is that it's not really functioning outside of that moment.
No, I think you're absolutely right there. You compare Hopkins' performance to like Brian Cox's performance in Manhunter, and the Brian Cox one works better to a present day viewing. It just seems to be more contained, and it seems to be more part of the world in which it's in. Whereas Hopkins completely dominates that film because of the bigness of the performance, because of the absurdity of the performance, and it has the effect now of unbalancing the film.
Yes.
So like you have a dynamic of two main serial killers. You've got Buffalo Bill and you've got Hannibal Lecter. Now, Hannibal Lecter isn't in the film that much, really, but you want to see Hannibal. You want to see Hannibal because it's such a strange performance. It's so incongruous. It's so out there. And I just don't think that, I mean, it's not just that performance, it's the film. The film is kind of unique, certainly contextually. There are not many films like it from that era, apart from the ones that are trying to ape it. So it was new. Horror at that point, there wasn't really anything like it being marketed as a horror film.
I think that's a big part of it. I think Elliot pointed out the aesthetic markers. I think that's absolutely right. The straitjacket, the upright gurney, and the hockey mask, which directly sort of references Jason, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
But not in such a way that it's unfortunate, you know. But all these monsters that we find fascinating, they all have that. They all have kind of an aura of aesthetic markers. You know, Dracula has all these things around him that go with him. And he is kind of, Lecter, certainly in Silence of the Lambs, he is kind of a restatement of Dracula. You know, he's kind of, he's very Dracula-ish in that. And I think at a time when horror really felt worn out, and you know, everything had been done, and nothing interesting new was coming along, and you know, you couldn't do those stories anymore. You couldn't do Dracula anymore, and you know, ironically, they do. You know, we talked about the Bram Stoker's Dracula. The Coppola movie came out the following year.
Yeah,
but
right.
It's interesting how determinedly that plays against everybody's ideas of what Dracula looks like, and yet B also includes all those aesthetic markers. You know, the castle, the bat, etc. etc. And you have Lecter come along at a time when, you know, just before these things start getting rehabilitated, when they all seem to be dead, and yet we still want the Gothic.
Yeah, isn't it fascinating as well that it's smuggled, all of that is smuggled in under the radar in the package of this rather ostensibly sort of grown-up crime drama, which was responded well to by critics and academics and whatnot, which horror generally wasn't at the time. So you got a lot of people going to see Silence of the Lambs who generally didn't like or didn't go to see horror.
Well, I think that's, again, part of it is the cachet that Anthony Hopkins brings to it. I think you're right about that. It
and
makes
probably
it seem
Jodie
like
Foster as well, because she was
by
that point associated with a certain quality of film by that point.
Right. So this is a
two
proper grown-up piece of work.
Be, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. This isn't just an exploitative slasher fic. This is a pick. This is a proper movie. Look who's in it. You know, you have these proper actors who have this cachet with them. Absolutely. And it comes at the culmination, you know, it's 1991, the film was released. So it's coming really at the culmination of sort of it's a rather unfortunate phrase, but the golden era of serial killers. That's through the 70s and 80s.
The sort of great slasher franchises, all of those are dying at that point.
Yeah. And it's
they've already moved into parody by that point, haven't they? I mean,
Yes. Yeah, and self-referential self-examination and things like that.
It wouldn't be long before we had Scream, of course,
Yeah. So here comes this thing that's playing it absolutely straight, that has overtones of seriousness, that nonetheless is addressing these things that have been an enormous social concern, a frightening social concern for a long time. Right. And it has nevertheless, despite its markers of seriousness, it has this determined tinge of the Gothic about it. And the 90s were we talked about the X-Files. The 90s were, for various interesting reasons, an era when we started digging up these Gothic ideas and restating them in terms of paranoia about government and systems and things like that.
I mean, one little cultural.
Plays into that a bit. No, I'm finished.
You just reminded me that one little sort of cultural object, and I apologize in advance because this is just very much in my wheelhouse. Again, linked to the Silence of the Lambs and all this, what we were saying about the 90s. It's probably the link I can make is that the person who it involves was actually nearly cast as Robert Lecter in the series, and that's David Bowie. But he was unavailable to play Robert Lecter, which is Hannibal's father, probably just as well. But there's a not a very well-known album that David Bowie did in the 90s called Outside. And the pulling on Thomas Harris, and again, it's that because it was in the cultural air. And in that particular album, which is the most extraordinary album, because it is basically an industrial opera.
I really love that album.
It's fantastic. But I mean, we get the character of the voyeur, and it's hinted. And I had this idea that when Bowie worked with Enda Walsh before he died to make the Lazarus play in 2015, I think that was as much outside under the skin as it was a sequel to The Man Who Fell to Earth, because The Man Who Fell to Earth was famous and acclaimed, and I think it was used to smuggle the other, which was obscure and critically mauled at the time. But the voyeur in this album, which is kind of an album and kind of a sort of sonic diary come theatrical piece, is this kind of demon killer, something that works to a design, and the design being to critique late 20th century culture, and you get this artistic destruction of an innocent, a girl, a 14-year-old girl, and rather like as in Hannibal, she is offered up as a work of art symbolically. She's a sacrifice to Gnostic gods on the eve of the millennium, all that kind of thing. And this voyeur character is akin to Hannibal if you choose to go in that direction with Hannibal as something more than a man. There is a sense that you get this, the way that whole album was put together, because it is an album of music, it is a diary, it is the way the video promos work on it. And in the initial video promo, he's created in an outsider artist studio, and they are constructing a minotaur, a creature of myth. Horns are big deal all the way through Hannibal, the image of horns. And then whatever this creature is, this minotaur, then emerges as a serial killer for the rest of the album. And we get these elements that feel very much at home in Thomas Harris. We get a snuff tape of the victim between a couple of songs, which also connects to things like the Moors murders, the Murderer's Art, which runs through Hannibal. And there's this brilliantly titled and rather creepy number called Wishful Beginnings, which Bowie sings in this kind of cultured chanteuse voice. And again, rather like Harris with Hannibal, he's subverting the idea of psychopathy, because you've been presented with this serial killer, this mythical creature, and the lyrics are, "I'm sorry, little girl, the pain must feel like snow, let it go," and which chimes so much that idea of sadism as not being sociopathy or psychopathy. That Hannibal gains pleasure in his work, and the voyeur gains pleasure in his work. So it just occurred to me that apart from being a bit of a banger of an album, it does that Hannibal adjacent thing, because this stuff was in the air. These anxieties were in the air, and it was really pertinent to me when I did see the Lazarus play in London in 2015, and I just thought, he's rather like how Hannibal the television series has to do CSI Baltimore, has to do police procedure. It's like, this is marketing itself as a sequel to The Man Who Fell to Earth, but that little girl who's haunting the guy in his, well, that guy's Nathan Adler, the detective from The Outside Up, and that girl is the victim, baby Grace, who's killed by the voyeur, who is then presented in the play as a serial killer coming to get him. It's like, this is actually the sequel to Outside, but there's no way you could market that, because it's not The Man Who Fell to Earth. It's not the famous, and he can't use any of the music from it, so he has to put the new music to it or famous songs to it. And you think, this is another little sleight of hand, rather like Hannibal, in the sense that it has to present itself in one way in order to smuggle through another way what it's really intending. And that's why both those pieces are very odd to watch, because they seem to be purporting to be one thing. They're actually something completely different. But that's just another example of that thing that was in the air. I said, we talked about it earlier. It's The Silence of the Lambs, it's The X-Files, it's Young British Artists, it's Damien Hirst, it's Outside by David Bowie, it's Nine Inch Nails, it's it just permeates throughout the 90s.
Yeah, I suppose another thing that's going on in the 1990s is you are getting more awareness of real serial killers. I mean, you have to bear in mind, this is like pre-internet. People were not as aware of what a serial killer was, or what they did, or how they operated back then. So you are getting, like, in culture, the mythologization of the serial killer.
Oh, that's absolutely true, because I can certainly remember when things like Wikipedia was in its infancy, when it was still like an incredible novelty, doing that peep into the abyss and reading about serial killer, and properly unnerving myself.
Well, this is what people did at the heyday of the internet, isn't it? I mean, this is before there was any
rabbit holes, and you get into these little obsessive corners and thinking, what the hell's happening to me? But I had this conversation with a friend of mine, because she was saying, we had exactly the conversation about the internet, say 20 years ago, and she's saying the strange things it tapped into, because she was saying about how she started to delve into that, and I forget. I mean, I'm rather glad I've forgotten as well. She mentioned it, but it's the infamous Russian serial killer from the 90s. I mean, I think he clocked up about something like 90 killings and got away with it for absolutely ages. And there was a very, very, very bad film in which Malcolm McDowell played him. But anyway, that's by the by. But yeah, certainly, as you say, you could suddenly find out these things that were really, they were in old news. The newspapers are rather sanitized.
Yeah, by comparison. Yeah.
Or they would be in sort of top shelf magazines maybe, but extraordinary.
It gave people the ability to sort of tap into the abyss, like to stare directly into it in a way that had never been seen before.
So much of how we talk about serial killers, we talk about them in mythic terms. We talk about them like they are superheroes. We talk about them like they're evil geniuses. They're always one step ahead of the police, and they're, we imagine them as artists. We imagine them as coming up with these murders that express ideas. Esoteric, hermetic. I mean, look at Seven, for instance. Seven is the story of a serial killer who creates a series of artistic tableaux. Yeah. And as part of a grand design, as part of expressing an underlying philosophy and stuff.
Yes, he has an ideology, right?
This and mythic. The end credits are the first song from Outside.
Outside, exactly. Yeah. But, and I think Hannibal, Levi Strauss said myths are good to think with, and so I think what they're trying to do with Hannibal is they're trying to use the myth of the genius serial killer, which is a myth. As I say, most of these sorts of people are squalid, petty, small-minded, completely self-absorbed, unglamorous individuals. Like, Dennis Nielsen was a prick.
Yeah.
He could turn on the charm when he wanted to, but he was an obnoxious, self-absorbed, small-minded prick. That guy.
Yep. Totally.
That's what they're mostly like. But it's taking the myth of the serial killer and it's trying to use it to think with. And I think Thomas Harris, I don't quite know what Thomas Harris is getting at. He obviously finds something sinister in the bouginess of Hannibal. I don't know if it, and Hannibal acquires a sort of, it's certainly in filming, he acquires a European, they cast Brian Cox first time and then Anthony Hopkins the second time, both English, Brian Cox is Scottish, both British men, and then Mikkelsen he's a European. There's something un-American about him. There's something, about his civilizedness. And I don't think it's particularly successful in that instance. It's kind of more about the neuroses of certain people's view of elites and artistic and aesthetic elites and things like that.
Have we lost you?
Still there?
Hello?
Oh, we lost you just for a second there, Jack.
Got you back.
Rewind a bit.
Go again.
Yeah,
you're back.
Okay. What was the last thing you heard? Was I talking about the TV series yet?
No, not yet.
No. Well, certainly by the time they get to the TV series, they're trying to use the myth of the serial killer to think about bigger things. I mean,
absolutely.
And one of the things you can use the serial killer to think about is civilization itself. I mean, in Clive Barker's The Midnight Meat Train, he uses the figure of the serial killer as a way into this incredibly grandiose consideration of kind of human civilization itself as being at its absolute base, being based on butchery and exploitation and the consumption of human beings.
Of that story.
Yeah, and it's set in New York for a reason. New York is the greatest human city that has ever existed and probably will ever exist. It's in its own terms, it's the greatest achievement of the human race.
Yeah. It's using New York as an icon, isn't it? It is the city. It may as well be called City.
It's the apotheosis of the entire project of civilization, good and bad tied up together.
And the fact that its roots are based in the slaughter of innocents, right? That, a cannibalistic slaughter of innocents.
That's the point he's making. He's making the point that, civilization just is that,
and I
amongst
think
other things. And
that's very much in Hannibal, the series of Hannibal, right? He's very much embodied in Hannibal himself.
Absolutely.
Well, Hannibal,
so what they do is they reconfigure the idea of sort of the brutal, evil European sophisticate. They reconfigure it away from the sort of very obvious origins in Thomas Harris from Dracula and things like that, while keeping that wonderful Gothic, that loadedness with the Gothic. But they reconfigure it so that it starts to be about civilization itself, and then you have almost a conceptual pun in the idea of Hannibal as a civilized man, as an educated man, and you get part of that, of course, is how they present his connoisseurship. One of the things I'll always remember from the television series is the gourmet dish, which is basically you just eat an entire chick alive.
Yeah, the songbird drowned in cognac.
Yeah, which is savage. It's absolutely disgusting, but it's presented to us as kind of the apex of Hannibal's gourmet sensibilities, his connoisseurship. So it's civilization again. It's what we think of as kind of the height of civilized behavior, and it's savage.
Yeah, but he is both personification and extreme, because I think the extra, if you like, kink or curious thing about Hannibal is absolutely he is that thing. He is a personification of civilization. But there's also this extra thing of him being better at it than civilization. When he is down in the mud, when he is down in the blood and the umska and the dirt and the viscera, he does it without conscience because he has a design.
Yeah.
And then when he is when he's up, in the stars, and he is a connoisseur of good food, good wine, great art, and great music, and he does that significantly better than civilization tends to do as well. Yeah. So you end up with this, and I think the sting in the tail, and it's something that I think the series achieves far better than almost any other source, is the idea that, oh my God, the real horror lies in that he is without hypocrisy. Yeah. Because the problem with the society, with the civilization, is that it is riven with the hypocrisies that he is ironed out. Mm-hmm. When it gets down and dirty, it puts morality over it. Oh, this is a humanitarian intervention.
Yeah, right.
Yes, we don't really like factory farming. So here is your vegan option, but factory farming still goes on. And so on and so forth. He just, in being presented to us as a serial killer, as being something terrible and awful, you find that actually what he is something perversely better than anyone, because there's there is no false morality. It comes back to that Lucifer thing of, I'm trying to find the best in you. I am the ultimate humanist in a sense.
Yeah. And the original rebel
table as it doesn't. I don't make a distinction between eating a chicken leg or a human leg.
Absolutely, the Miltonic Satan is the ultimate rebel against authority. Exactly, famously, Milton was accused of being of the devil's party without realizing it, because he presents Satan so sympathetically. Certainly in the context of the English Civil War, it becomes sort of this romantic idea of rebellion against unjust authority. But this links up with what I was saying before, which is that in the television series, there is an obscure feeling, certainly for me, that Hannibal is kind of on our side. He is kind of a representation of rebellion and, refusal to accept injustice. And it's very hard to square with some of the atrocious evil things that he does, but it doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. You just feel it. You can't help feeling it. And part of it is that he feels like he's consciously a critique, And it's like he's embodying civilization and also critiquing it at the same time, and knowingly so. Unlike the rather sort of petty, small-minded snob that we see in the earlier iterations, he knows what he's doing. And I think you've hit it, Elliot. It is that what he's saying basically is this all of this is civilization, the cruelty, the pain, the blood, the suffering, and it's how we get the beautiful food and the beautiful art and the beautiful music. You can't separate those things out. So if you're going to enjoy one, you have to enjoy the other as well. And you have to enjoy them wholeheartedly, with your whole heart, with your whole being, or you're just wasting it.
Yeah. This is why he's a true anti-hero in the correct sense, because the problem is with so many of our heroes is that they are motivated by morality, and it's facile. It's a facile morality. I mean,
what they're motivated by actually is orthodoxy. They're motivated by maintaining order, and that's it. It's maintaining the status quo.
Often, when they too, their hypocrisies. The obvious one that, of course, springs to mind because I spent so much of my childhood watching it is Doctor Who. I mean, Doctor Who is presented to still as a kind of ideal and aspirational figure, but who is genocidal, who is colonialist. And Hannibal cuts through the crap that smothers a character like the Doctor. I mean,
funnily enough, so does the Master. The Master is the more legitimate Time Lord than the Doctor, because we all know, part of us, even if it's unconscious, part of us knows that any apparent morality the Doctor portrays is a game. It's a play act, right? What the fuck does morality mean to someone who can reboot the universe on a whim, which he does all the time?
But not only is he incredibly manipulative, even the closest people to him, but I always love the wonderful contradiction of then, as soon as he touches down, or she, or they, in present day society, or at some point in history, Earth history, human history, it's I can't do anything about this.
Right.
Hang on a moment. You brought down that despotic regime on the planet Zog, or you did this over here, but you can't do that. And it's like, whoa. And there, that's something that a character like Hannibal Lecter absolutely just cuts through, literally, often.
So many heroes are not actually heroic in that they don't really, they're just hero coded. We're simply told that they are heroes, and what that tends to mean, the Doctor is just the master, except that he's decided to ally himself with humanity, which much of the time means he's decided to ally himself with the proper authorities of, well, basically England. The English ruling class. So that's all. That's the only difference. But he's coded as a hero, and so many heroes are like that. We're just told that they're
absolutely
good. And the villains are bad again because they're just villain coded because they've got a black beard, and
it's all about having all the way through fiction, doesn't it? Gandalf is this. Gandalf is so this in the Lord of the Rings. Aslan is probably one of the best examples of this.
It's not as if I have or any of us have a sort of necessarily a fetish for quote unquote bad characters, but there's a reason but there's a reason that characters like Milton's Lucifer or Richard III or Hannibal Lecter in the series are so bracing is because they're not hypocrites.
Yeah.
I mean, they do awful things, but there is a logic to them. There is a consistency to them.
Yeah.
And this, funnily enough, this ties into something else that I think about the movie Silence of the Lambs. One of the things, I mean, the most successful thing in the movie, the most interesting thing in the movie is the relationship between Hannibal and Clarice. Yeah. When the movie works, when it really works, it's because it's doing that and it's working.
Agreed, yeah.
And the thing about that relationship is that Hannibal treats her as an equal. Yeah. He does, well, not quite, but the inequality in the relationship is based on the fact that she's young, and she's still learning. She's still a trainee. Yeah, it's not based upon the fact that she's a woman. And that film, of course, taken from the book, is very, very much about sexism and misogyny. It's interesting now because it hits completely differently. The whole thing about Buffalo Bill building a woman's suit from women's skins.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I mean, it was wrong then as well, but we're particularly aware of it now because it comes over unavoidably as a transphobic, which it is. Yeah. It is transphobic.
Yeah. Even though Harris tries to get around it, he puts the words in Lecter's mouth. Buffalo Bill is not a real transsexual, but he tries to be. It's like you're not getting away with that, Harris. You're not getting away with that.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't work. It's not good enough, but he does try it. And that's the interesting thing. He's specifically trying to, he's lampshading. He's trying to pull back from that and tell us what it actually means, because that's not what he's going for. What he's going for is a depiction of misogyny. Buffalo Bill is about the fetishization of women, turning them into objects, using them as raw material. And the entire film we see, and again, it does come from the book. We see people looking at Starling and judging her, and she has to navigate these intensely male spaces and things like this. And that's what the film is getting at. And I think that's part of its appeal as well, because in the early 90s, feminism was in a really strange place because you'd had the backlash, what Susan Faludi called the backlash, this intense social reaction against feminism. And then that was starting to be undermined again by a reaction to the reaction by the early 90s. And I think the early 90s is when the process of the rebirth of feminism as we know it now as a movement, I think that's where it starts to begin anyway. And I think there's something about that preoccupation with the movie, which again is one of the most successful things in the movie, where it shows us misogyny, not just in this grand way, this grand extravagant way that Buffalo Bill practices it, but also just in the everyday life of a woman trying to do a job.
And there are two successes. I think there are two.
Part of the appeal of Lecter is that he treats her as an equal. So again, there's this against the grain of the character. There is this sense in which he's kind of representing us, as we'd like to see ourselves. He's kind of the hero in that sense.
Yeah, it's unambiguous, I think, in Silence of the Lambs. He is the hero of the film. Certainly in terms of his framing.
Yeah. And that's very true, because there's obviously there's that sequence at the end where Bill, because of the night vision, can see Clarice and she cannot see him, the woman under male gaze. But also there's some fascinating earlier in the
it's
film.
Intensely concerned with looking.
Yes, there are so many close-ups of her where she's absolutely dead center in the frame, looking down the barrel of the camera lens.
Yeah.
It's really unusual framing, and she's looking at us, looking back at her. We're not even getting the trick of looking, to the side. Don't look in the camera, darling. She's absolutely down the barrel of the lens in dialogue scenes, which is really fascinating.
Well, there's loads of shots in Silence of the Lambs where the characters are looking straight at the camera in the conversation where they're having. One character will be looking in the camera talking, and then the other character, you cut to them, and they're looking into the camera talking. So what you're seeing in each shot is the other character's point of view, which again is part of how that film is obsessed with. It's kind of a stylistic tick of that director, but it's very much in line with the themes of that film, which then the Brett Ratner Red Dragon mimics that because it's trying to make the prequel aesthetically coherent with Silence of the Lambs for no real reason at all, because it doesn't fit into that
right
story.
I was going to say it's like a floating signifier, isn't it? It doesn't have any connection to anything. But that film, the Brett Ratner,
there is a lot in Red Dragon about looking. I mean, it's the whole thing with he sees the families in the photographs and the film, and he wants to see himself reflected, so he breaks the mirrors and put them in their eyes. You have the subplot with the blind woman and so on. But of course, the Red Dragon movie doesn't.
It doesn't really go there, does it? It doesn't do anything with it, to be perfectly honest.
It's not what it's interested in. It's interested in being a prequel to Silence of the Lambs. That's
exactly
its main concern.
That's its entire project, isn't it? So we want to make another Hannibal film. Yeah. Okay, fine. This is what is in a Hannibal film. There you are. It's why the film of Hannibal, which is so. It's much maligned, and it is a very ridiculous film in many, many respects, but I feel that it owns its ridiculousness. I like the pantomimic quality of it. I like the fact that it's absurd and that it's big and that it's florid, and it just goes for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's quite a good film in that respect. It just
I enjoy it quite a lot.
It acknowledges the inherent ridiculousness and the bigness of it. And of all the media that exists before the TV series, it's the one that's most like a prefiguration of the TV series.
Yes, very much so. And it also does away with some of the problematics of the book. I mean, most of the problematic elements are not in it.
The infamous thing about the book, of course, is the ending where Lecter kind of brainwashes Starling into explicitly becoming his lover, and they go off together and have sex all the time and go to operas and things. And it's implied that eventually the drugs and the brainwashing wear off, and she comes back to her senses, but she still wants to be with him, and they ride off together into the sunset, which genuinely it upset and infuriated a lot of people at the time. And I was angry about it because I read the novel when it came out, and I mean, the film does away with that, obviously, but
completely.
What do we think about that? It does feel like a betrayal, doesn't it? Particularly after making the Silence of the Lambs, which again is very much. I mean, it's hard to think why Thomas Harris would write the Silence of the Lambs and then write that ending.
It completely undercuts why Hannibal is interested in Clarice Starling. The whole thing with Hannibal and Clarice Starling is that Clarice is unbreakable. She is the straight arrow. She cannot be subverted. Her morality is so absolute and that's what Hannibal finds appealing about her. And he, at the ending of Hannibal, the book, he subverts it completely. He corrupts her. He turns her like him. The entire basis of their relationship is undone. In the film, you get the exact opposite. She is completely unbending. You still get the impression that there is something going on there, but she is completely unwavering still. And that is it. I mean, he even has that moment, which is not in the book, by the way, where he traps her in the fridge. She's got her ponytail caught in the fridge. And he goes to bite her, but she doesn't she doesn't even blink, and he stops and he says, "That's my girl." You get the impression that if she demonstrated what he would consider cowardice there, then he probably would have, mutilated her or done away with her, but he doesn't.
Yeah, because that's very strong, of course, in the original movie as well, because she is told explicitly, do not give him any memories. And when she does give him the memory about the Silence of the Lambs,
of course,
and it's helped along immensely by Foster's very intelligent performance. It is done, as you say, in that completely unswerving, direct, I've chosen.
Yeah.
And there is a tremendous amount of agency there, and he respects the agency, and that comes out, as you say, in that sequence. I mean, he would rather take his own hand off than subvert her directness. And
he gives her, when she's still at the dinner table with Krendler, and he says something along the lines of, do you see their jealousy of your purity and your incorruptibility? All you need to see it, Clarice, is a mirror. And it's like the best compliment anyone could ever pay her. You can see from Julianne Moore's performance, which is actually really good in that
very
film,
good performance. It's very good performance.
That she is really struck by it, and it's reluctant because it's this it's this cannibalistic serial killer who's giving her this performance, who's just spent a moment cooking this guy's brains. But it's a brilliant moment. It's a really beautiful moment because there you've got the core of not only Clarice but also her relationship with that version of Hannibal.
And that's why it's interesting that when he's not made petty or bougie, it's about he is extremely respectful and admiring of people who have a trait which is pure and they see it through to its end.
Well, the interesting thing about Hannibal,
and of course, really the rudeness when it's like, oh, I don't like. It's not. It's more crudeness.
It's
rather
crudity.
Than
yes, it's
like,
not.
It's
rudeness.
like you've let yourself down.
Yeah.
There's always that sense that his victims are people who've let themselves down.
Yeah.
And you really get that. And again, it's a very smart performance in the television series with Chilton. Because you let yourself down consistently. Because you've got the diplomas, you've got the position, you've got everything, but you're kind of like Rick from The Young Ones. Everything you say he just completely destroys any credibility or status you think you've got.
Yeah.
Only the irony is that Chilton does have those things. He's clearly achieved in his field. But he's a fucking moron as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He's sort of failed up, hasn't he? That version.
He's failed
of
up. I love the concept of failing up. Oh my God, we can't stand this person. What should we do? Well, we can't sack them, so we better promote them.
And the actor.
In so many working situations where people are promoted to better pay grades because they're awful, but you can't get rid of them. And then you just need Hannibal to come in and create a little accident for them at least.
Yeah. Get through the dead wood.
Where there would at least be some justice.
It's a much expanded role, obviously, in the TV series. But my God, Frederick Chilton is amazing in the TV series. He provides a leavening agent because he's just the right side of camp. The performance is just the right side. There are little moments where he's playing it for laughs, but it's not too much. It's not too far. And it's just wonderful.
Yeah. They luck in with with their performers, actually. They luck in enormously with that, who they get.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's exquisitely cast.
Because he's much more slimy in Silence of the Lambs, of course. I mean, in the Silence of the Lambs, Chilton is a totally horrific character. There's just nothing laudable about him at all.
Yeah, and he's almost like a comedy idiot in Red Dragon.
Yeah.
It's as you say, it's not the slightest bit interesting, except in Silence of the Lambs as yet another part of its critique of male attitudes to women and treatment of women in professional spaces. But apart from that, it really has no meaning,
No.
But Chilton in the television series is a rounded character, and he's not just a fool or anything like that. He's clearly a very intelligent man. He's actually the one who figures out before anybody else that Hannibal is the killer.
Yes, it's true.
So he's not an idiot. No. He's just a man that consistently lets himself down by going the easy route or not bothering.
Yes, and it's because
so
he
really,
doesn't.
what I think when Hannibal talks about rudeness, I think what he's actually talking about is laziness, intellectual laziness.
Yeah.
Crude or lazy. Yeah.
I mean, the thing about Chilton in the TV series is that he wants to be famous, doesn't he? He doesn't want to be where he is. Exactly, he considers himself to be better than he is. He wants to be the famous novelist, or or he wants a film deal or something to that effect.
And that it's also when with particularly with things like Mads Mikkelsen's wardrobe as Hannibal Lecter, when everything is put the way it is put, it is because it is right, not because it is to impress.
Mm-hmm.
It is, but these are the things that work best for me. But that's Lecter throughout every aspect of his life. Everything is considered.
Oh, just like the food and whatnot, there is this incredible sort of sartorial language in the TV series where you've got the obvious contrast between Will Graham and Hannibal Lecter, because Will is largely just unconsidered when it comes to fashion at all. He just wears whatever. He looks a wreck half the time, whereas Hannibal is always obviously very poised and very
always
beautiful.
Just on the threshold, rather like with Chilton and Camp, of flamboyance.
Yes,
but it's just held on the line.
Yeah, just.
And of course, it just does help that he's kind of like Fred Astaire in the sense that is a man who can wear a suit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it hangs on him very well, doesn't it? It's annoying, but it does hang on him very, very well indeed. But that's a language they use. I mean, like there is a direct contrast that's more subtle between Chilton and Hannibal, because they are obviously much more mirrors of one another than Will and Hannibal are. Chilton, the thing about Hannibal is that Hannibal is everything that Chilton wants to be.
Yes. Yeah.
Chilton's got this sort of puppy-like quality. He's almost aspirational towards Hannibal and resents him because of it, because he is that slightly petty little shit.
Yeah.
And
he's kind of a mirror to the earlier version of Hannibal, as indeed is the other serial killer in the television series that's played by Eddie Izzard. He's specifically, I mean, he's framed, he's given things to do that Hannibal does in the books, like attacking the nurse,
Yes.
And he's in a uniform like Hannibal's in. He's in a cell like Hannibal's in. So he's kind of an extra character for them to dump all the things that they've taken out
curious
of Hannibal from the previous iteration. Yeah.
Abel Gideon, that's right.
Abel Gideon.
Abel Gideon, that's it, yeah.
It's fascinating because that's part of the themes of the show. Of course, you get this incredible cross-pollination between characters where Hannibal is imprinting parts of himself onto Will Graham and onto Alana Bloom and onto Jack Crawford. But also it's happening the other way. It happens the other way, certainly with Will. Will kind of imprints on Hannibal to a very sincere degree, to the point whereby they basically merge. That's part of the themes of the show, where Will is now unsure of who he is and Hannibal is slightly unsure of who he is.
Yeah.
It's
merging, isn't it? Yeah.
It's
curious merging.
Part of why Hannibal frames Will as the Chesapeake Ripper, you get the feeling that it's kind of he wants Will to be him.
Yeah.
Or he wants to be Will. If Will is identified as Hannibal's, other self, and he's blamed for Hannibal's crimes, and he goes to jail in Hannibal's place. It's like it's like they're closer together. It's like Will is inhabiting Hannibal's secret self.
Absolutely. You get that wonderful displacement at the beginning of season 2, where Will is blamed, obviously, for the Chesapeake Ripper's crimes and is in the asylum. And Hannibal is playing Will Lecter. Will Lecter, there's a Freudian.
Will Lecter.
There was one. Yeah. He's playing Will Graham, right? He even says, I think he has a session with Bedelia where he says, I got to be Will Graham today.
Yeah.
Wow. Yes. That's a real memory, that line. Yes.
Right.
Wow.
And he loves it. It's one of those rare moments where you see emotion as well.
Yeah. Glee almost.
Yeah. He's actually like, he's a bit of a kid. He's got his legs crossed, and he's almost doing that thing that kids do, where they rub their legs together when it's too much, the emotion is too, it's got that quality about it. And it's really interesting. Really interesting.
Well,
the thing that marks Will out as specifically fascinating is this ability that he has.
Yeah.
And the ability is specifically said to be connected to empathy, and he can empathize with anyone. So, I mean, really, it's pretty clear. You know, Hannibal has at last encountered somebody who might be able to see the world from his point of view.
Yeah, to actually understand him. Yeah, and to understand reality as he perceives it.
He wants to be known.
Temptation.
He wants to be understood.
Yeah.
But it's dangerous.
Yeah, it is dangerous. I mean, at the very end, you get that that encounter between them where he says, and it's kind of sweet because it's Hannibal yearning for Will, where he says, "Will, was it good to see me?" Yes. And he doesn't mean was it good to see me again physically. He means, is it good to see me, the world as I perceive it? And Will says, "Good, no." No. Yeah. Of course he's lying as well. We know that from his conversations with Bedelia. He's lying. Will does like this world.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to.
No, that's the wonderful thing about it. He likes being Hannibal Lecter. He actually, and the reason, the moment you realize that is towards the end of season 2 when he phones Hannibal and tells him to go. When he tells him they know.
Oh yeah. That's an amazing moment.
That is beautiful.
It directly mirrors what Hannibal does with what's he called? The Minnesota Shrike. Whatever
Garrett
his real
Jacob
name
Hobbs.
is.
Yeah.
Hobbs, that's it. Yeah.
Who, of course, Will also imprints on massively. You know, part of Garrett Jacob Hobbs becomes very absorbed into Will.
Yes, Hobbs sort of follows him round post-mortem. And again, that's part of the perpetual hesitation. You know, it could be that is actually Hobbs's spirit following Will about the place.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter one way or the other.
No, I think in season 3, certainly the metaphysical elements are even more overt, aren't they? They just become the whole thing becomes Dantean, fittingly enough.
In the memory palace, they're reconfiguring the reality around them just by talking, and they can both see the same figurative display that we, the audience, are watching. You know, and it's by that point you're beyond. You know, is this a hallucination? Is this really happening?
Right, it doesn't matter, right? You're asking. Yeah. If you're being, it's that internet critic thing of being far too literal, isn't it? You know, if you're asking that, then you are missing the point.
You're missing it,
You're
powerfully.
missing the point.
And of course, I mean, you see it at the end as well when they're fighting the great red dragon. They see the dragon, right? He physically becomes the dragon. He sprouts wings and a tail. God, that moment, it's shivers, just shivers. Can I just say, aesthetically, I really love it when Hannibal dresses down in the show. There are a couple of sequences where Jack Crawford turns up at his door early and he's wearing a jumper. He looks really good.
I think Hannibal's plastic murder suit is a wonderful innovation of the TV series. It's great.
It's so good.
It's become another one of those quintessential aesthetic markers, like the mask,
What I love about it is that he's so fussy that underneath it he wears his suits.
Yeah.
I just love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
But that's also, just on their part, just a great moment of humour. Which really, it's like those little moments are great. It's not overdone, but it's just, that's rather good. On a practical level, just turning my attention to housekeeping, how are we doing this then? So we're going to take 2 episodes, is that right? And
I think that's the best way to do it, to be honest.
Right.
2 episodes per discussion, and chat about them, I suppose. See what's going on.
And I mean, I don't want to sort of hold anyone to anything, but sort of just as a general, what sort of turnover you look at? Because I'm simply just thinking in terms of when I watch and when we're likely to then go for it, really.
I mean, it might be tricky, but I'd love to get it either weekly or bi-weekly if possible, if that's a possible thing.
maybe do things in a bit more concentrated way. Do you mean? So that would Well, that's good for me, because I also know that Vicky, my partner, was like, "Oh, I'd like to see that again," because she's only seen it the once. So I'm going to time it around both of us, so I can get 2 done a week, and then
fabulous.
I don't stall the procedures, because I must admit, after this, I'm kind of ready to get started now. I've been,
good.
Fired
up. Yeah,
I think it's possible. It's possible we might end up doing, 3 in one go or something like that. We'll just see how it works.
See how
everyone's schedule is different and everything. But I mean, I'm very committed to the idea in principle, and I'm certainly going to make sure that I carve out time to not only see the episodes but to be available. So that's cool.
Yeah, that would be ideal.
And I think maybe we aim for it to be all 3 of us, but if there's like a week where only 2 of us can make it, I think those 2 should go ahead and do it.
Yeah,
sure thing.
Keep up the momentum of it.
Yeah. Because that would be great. Yeah, no, I quite agree. Yeah, that's cool.
I'm well up for it. I mean, it probably is gun to head one of my favorite TV shows ever made.
Yeah, I mean, I stand by what I said at the beginning. I think there's probably about half a dozen things made in the last 25 years that really are superb, and this is one of them.
It's why I keep coming back to it. I always have, whenever I come across something I enjoy this much, I have an almost like incredulous reaction to it, where I'm like, is it really that good? And so I keep going back to it and scratching it, It's like, it is. Yeah. It's annoying.
Yes. But I'm quite looking forward to the idea of, because of course this way of watching it, maybe, which probably work out 2 per week, is in much more concentrated form than I did the first time. So I'm quite interested to see just how that works.
It really works. The progression of, I mean, I watched, like, glutted myself on, I was watching like 4 or 5 episodes at a time. It was ridiculous, utterly bloody ridiculous. But it works very, very well as a continuous narrative. It really does.
Right. Well, that's good. I mean, I was kind of hoping that maybe that was going to be the format, but that's really encouraging, because I think once I start, I'll be like, yes, okay, let's keep going.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we didn't even get on to Mason Verger, did we? My God, that's going to be
fun.
We've
got plenty to do. With him again. So well cast. I didn't even realize they replaced him halfway through.
No, I didn't. I know.
I had not the first clue.
I mean, even taking into account that he's under makeup, it was but again, I was again very impressed, because I knew the actor, of course, as having played Jimmy Darmody in Boardwalk Empire, and it's a really great performance as Mason Verger. It's so colossally different from the performance he gives in Boardwalk Empire, which is something that actors don't often get the chance to
do. I mean, he's a gift of a character to play as well, isn't it? Because he's really pure. I mean, he is like just pure filth. There's nothing redeeming about
I know
it.
I used to get told off for doing an impression of him around the house, because Vicky finds him incredibly creepy. Don't do that voice, she would say.
Okay, guys, I think that's an aperitif or appetizer, a pretty substantial one. The 2.5 hour appetizer before the main course.
Right. Well, it's been lovely to have you for dinner.
It's been a pleasure.
Yes.
I hope you're sufficiently glutted.
Marvelous. Well, looking forward to it. I will get 2 done this week and catch up with you again.
Excellent. Before we go, guys, if there is anything you'd like to pimp out, please do so.
Okay, well, we go to Twitter and look at @_Jack_Graham_. You will find me and links to pretty much everything. My main thing is the podcast I Don't Speak German, which I do with Daniel Harper, where we talk about the far right. We've had a bit of a hiatus recently, but we are about to get back to it. And of course, there's the entire back catalogue. I also blog at Eruditorium Press and at my Substack Times Carcass. That's pretty much it. If you want to give some money to my Patreon, $1 a month will get you everything, and you'll get advance access to anything I write and any podcasts. Like, you'll get the IDSG bonus episodes for patrons only. You'll get advance access to this, for instance. So yeah, that's me.
Lovely. Excellent. Links below, by the way, guys.
Yeah, I'm still looking forward to Jaws, actually. Yeah. Yes. I mean, I have very rarely have anything to pimp because I'm a work shy fop, unlike Jack. But just the usual stream of either of audiobooks, either producing or narrating, which pop up on certain rather famous websites, which you can of course purchase if you are so inclined. That's about all I do.
Excellent. Again, links below, ladies and gents. As for myself, same as usual, you can find me knocking about here on Exaggerated Elegy or the attached Our Lives in Horror channel, where we're doing interviews and discussions with various creatives from the horror community. For links to all of my published work, go to strangeplaygrounds.com. And if you fancy a chat, you can find me at Enigmatic Elegy on Twitter. Once again, guys, thanks so much.
Thank you.
am so looking forward to this. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Until next time. Bye-bye. Take care, all.
Yum, yum. Bye.
Ta-ta.